closer attention. So I think we'll start the conversation. We're going to do a bit of a tour de table, looking at different countries, but also people that will bring different perspectives. We'll start with Tunisia, with Dario Trombetta, who's joining us online from the EU delegation. And Dario is the program manager in charge of energy and climate finance at the EU delegation in Tunisia. To maybe hear from Dario how the EU is approaching and is supporting energy transition, renewable energy in the context of Tunisia. What is the EU prioritizing? Which projects are they funding? What are the frameworks and instruments that are being used, particularly with the recent MOU that was signed with Tunisia recently? But also, Dario, if you can tell us a bit about the space and ability to consult with local communities, other stakeholders, and ultimately where you see from your standpoint as an expert on energy and climate finance, where Tunisia is at when it comes to its energy transition. Tunisia historically was one of the first countries to start thinking about renewable energy, and then it fell behind in terms of planning. And there's, at least for those of us on the outside observing, maybe it looks like there's maybe renewed interest. So we would love to hear from you. I will introduce, by the way, speakers as I call on them. Dario, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Nadim, and thank you, colleagues, for this invitation today. It's really a great pleasure to be with you on this topic, which is, I think, very timely. And in general, I think it is acknowledged by everyone, the importance of both ensuring an energy transition and an energy transition which is just. Indeed, myself, I serve here in Tunisia, so I can talk mainly about the Tunisian case and how the EU tries to support the Tunisian government in its ambitious objective of 35% renewable energy in 2030, which is, as we all know, essentially tomorrow. To start with, what I would like to say is the fact that we consider energy a win-win topic in our cooperation with the Tunisia, as it is beneficial for both Tunisia and the European Union. I will try to explain you why and how we would like to ensure, of course, that there is a transition and that this one will be just. So, as you rightly mentioned, we signed in June 2024 a memorandum of understanding with the Tunisian government, which, let's say, outlines something that we have been doing actually for the past at least 7-8 years, I would like to say, and it looks forward to what we could do in the future, because as you rightly pointed out, on the one hand, Tunisia has been historically a very ambitious and I would say first mover in the region when it comes to topics like energy efficiency. Probably some of the people in the room know already that in 2009 already Tunisia presented its Tunisian solar plan, which was already ambitious at the time, and that the region looked at Tunisia, but also Europe, as indeed one of the fastest moving players. Moving forward till today, I would say that energy efficiency measures definitely had a prominent role in Tunisia with good results. But when it comes to renewable energies, the situation is a bit different. We see still today an installed capacity when it comes to renewable at about, I would say, 5%, probably not moving much forward until, I would say, a couple of years ago. What changed in the past 2 or 3 years? Myself, I arrived 2 years ago, so I will be, of course, a bit more accurate always when talking about after 2022. I would say, first of all, that obviously with the pandemic on the one hand and the inflation crisis on the other one, as you all know, the global dynamics of the markets changed very quickly. For some countries in the region, this was even beneficial. For others, like Tunisia, that I probably should say that, of course, Tunisia imports 2/3 of its energy requirements from other countries. Local resources are quickly depleting. It is estimated that probably in the next 10 to 15 years, Tunisian own resources of gas will be depleted. So this means that the energy transition, first and foremost, it is essential for Tunisia itself to be more independent, to strategically manage, probably in a different way, its requirements. And therefore, with this renewed interest, as you know it very well, it fit very well with the Green Deal ambitions we had in the now previous commission, the first von der Leyen commission then. And it aligned also, obviously, with our new tools that I will try to elaborate later on, as blended finance, mainly guarantees under the EFSD Plus, the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus. Now, as I said, we consider this a win-win strategy because it will be a winning strategy for Tunisia for the reasons that I outlined and that Tunisia has already presented at the COP previously, which include minus 46% actually in its carbon emissions. Tunisia has an ambitious objective of 35% renewable energy by 2030. And obviously there is many other economic reasons that go beyond that, including the high cost of import of Algerian gas. The other element, which I will try briefly to outline, it is the fact that obviously Tunisia can also create new markets, including electricity markets, due to its proximity with Europe. You know already probably that Tunisia has a pipeline that goes then to Italy, and it transports as of today mainly only natural gas, and of course the reconversion of the infrastructure, it's something that is possible, and private sector is already looking into that. So with that, Tunisia can obviously increase its foreign currency thanks to foreign investments, which is most needed in Tunisia now given the economic balance. And then on the other hand, obviously Tunisia can benefit of its proximity to Europe to create industries that they are very close to where the market is demanding them in the context of the EU's nearshoring and friendshoring initiatives. Tunisia has already a good basis for industry, and it has some legislation which is favorable to the investments, and this can also go forward, for instance, in the case of renewable hydrogen in the future. From the EU side, I think it is rather clear the willingness to invest in Tunisia, mainly in electricity, I would say. So therefore, mainly it comes to wind and solar, but not only, because indeed, of course, this has some industrial interests. Now, how do we try to do this in a way that is fair and just? First and foremost, I would like to mention the national programs of the National Agency for Energy Efficiency, the ANME, Agence Nationale pour la Maîtrise de l'Énergie, which runs several national programs that go for energy efficiency and renewable energy. There we provide support to the agency. We try to communicate these programs to the broader population, to the broader citizenship basis, so that everyone knows what can benefit out of some investment primes or some funds that are available for the Tunisians. And then more broadly than that, of course, most of you know the agency. It's really a very good tool in order to discuss how we should go forward in terms of energy efficiency, renewable energy, making energy audits, for instance, at the municipal level. At the municipal level, also interventions like changing LEDs, ensuring energy efficiency in buildings. So I think that the ANME is quite an important actor in this regard. Trying to go to how we can scale this up, how we can go forward, because you know very well probably already that in terms of climate ambitions, so we're talking about billions, trillions sometimes mentioned, and we need to unlock that investment from the private sector, because public sector money will not be enough. This has been said many times. So we try to mobilize as well our financial guarantees in the energy sector. We try as well to blend our subsidies, our grants, with the loans from the IFIs. This is obviously another key aspect. Generally, IFIs, I would say that they have high standards when it comes to social and environmental regulations. The main program, the main project I should mention today, it is ELMED, which is the Italy-Tunisia electricity infrastructure, which is essentially, for those who don't know the project, it's a cable that runs from Tunisia to Italy, and it will include 2 substations, so 1 on each side. And it is not precisely from the beginning for renewable energy targets, but it is mainly to stabilize the network, to increase, of course, the existing network in the Mediterranean region. And as you know, it is also to stabilize the 2 grids. With this sort of support, we tried also to go beyond, and we tried to discuss with the Tunisian government mainly the possibility to reinforce the network, to reinforce the existing dispatch center, and we're going to support as well the increased renewable energy capacity when it comes to the tenders that have been launched in 2019 and 2022 for 1.7 gigawatt together with the financial institutions. All of this to say that I think for Tunisia it is a strategic interest for its own country to have more local production. It can, of course, create new industries. It can lower the costs of industries to then export to Europe products that have less content in terms of carbon intensity. And obviously, this, as you can imagine, it is very much linked to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because once the production it is shifted from natural gas to other sources, including in the future possibly renewable hydrogen, the products will be much more competitive. So we aim also at supporting Tunisia in this journey towards less carbon intensive industries. And we know that this is a strategic interest for Tunisia itself. As I'm coming to the end of this intervention, I would like also to mention the interest of the EU to support the reconversion of the existing infrastructure, for instance, when it comes to the renewable energy pipelines for the future. And that first, above all of this energy, quite a complex topic, rather technical, we are very much aware that civil society, but more generally stakeholders in Tunisia, have to be part of this transition, because of course there is a regional imbalances that can be overcome with the just energy transition. The south of Tunisia can play quite an important role, being today sometimes the least developed region, but having large resources when it comes to land, when it comes to, for instance, space, when it comes to availability for solar PVs. This we are very much aware, and at the same time we are also very much aware about the big issue we have that I'm sure you will talk about a lot today, which will be also about water scarcity and how you can ensure that jobs they are created locally. You know that from industry, probably jobs can be created rather well if this is done in a strategic way. Some sectors are more yielding than others. And then water resources, I think they have to be rooted in data. We need to make sure how much water has to be used for renewable hydrogen, ensuring the principle of additionality when it comes to private sector investment. And I will stop there. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Great. No, thank you very much, Dario. I think you really laid a very comprehensive, touching on a lot of the key issues and tension points. I think we're going to stay with Tunisia, and I'm going to move now to Mohammed Sabri, who is a research fellow with us at the Arab Reform Initiative, working on Tunisia, and a visiting postdoctoral researcher at the ISS Center at Erasmus University, and an expert on green transition, coming at it often from a state society as well perspective. As I turn it to you, Mohammed, I think from Dario's presentation, we can see where some of the key issues are, right, already. So on the one hand, you have a country very well positioned, right, to kind of be integrated within European markets. Some of the infrastructure is already there. big ambitions to move to 35% renewable energy. At the same time, totally dependent today to a large extent on Algerian gas. We also have a country where historically Tunisian history has been one of regional inequalities between the coasts. Oh, sorry. Between the coast and the interior. And could this shift to more renewable energy lead to better, more equal, more sustainable development across the country? And if so, how? But we also know that this is, so, you know, there's sort of tension point between the desire of, let's see if we can export energy to Europe, often through these sort of green hydrogen projects that are to get some of that foreign currency. Do we, you know, how do we get the balance right? We create jobs. If we're going to create jobs, we create them where? What kind of jobs are we creating? Who's going to benefit? There's also STEG, which is highly unionized in Tunisia. That's also, you know, there are people who will probably lose their jobs, or maybe new jobs get created. So there are a lot of, I think, questions there. We can all sense that there is the potential. Is the, you know, do you feel that in the conversations that you're following, in the research that you're doing, that more and more Tunisians, the different stakeholders, are feeling, yes, this is, you know, this is a project for us where this is exciting. People are going to start studying sort of to get these sorts of jobs, but also which communities will benefit from it as well. 10 minutes, please.
Thanks a lot for the introduction and very insightful thoughts. Yeah, I mean, of course, we all know that the green transition offers Tunisia, as many North African countries, great opportunities like energy security, energy export. We often hear also job creation, although this is a bit doubtful because, as many knows, it's mostly whenever, I mean, and renewable energy plants are being constructed, and that's it, without much job creation through other mechanisms. Yeah, so I mean, for a more sustainable and stable energy transition to take place, I believe that we should tackle the interests of the public rather than only the governments. Of course, the government has interest in things like energy security and export and so on, but the public has other interests. So we have really to look at the different stakeholders. And for me, the green transition is not, of course, it's targeting ecological concerns, yes, but it's also a developmental project. It could be a developmental project that engage different players. And so it should be thought as such. So, for example, if I'm going to borrow Asim Oglu and Robinson's terminologies about extractive and inclusive institutions, and say, okay, we can have also extractive pathway or inclusive pathway in the green transition. I would say that an extractive pathway that focus only on the government interest and dealing with the government and a few business people, if any, would probably not be sustainable, and it will not also answer the bigger questions in the region, like job creation, like poverty, like equality of distribution, and so on. But rather a developmental project that take care of the concerns of the different players would do so. And in order to have something of that sort, a more inclusive, let's say, and more sustainable pathway, then we have to tackle, for example, let's say, backward and forward in linkages that the renewable energy sector can create. So, for example, industries like cable and electronics, for example, windmill blades, in case of backward integration, forward integration, for example, fertilizers with green hydrogen and ammonia sector. And we should incentivize through different mechanisms like financial incentives or policy consultation and different things. We could incentivize FDI, EU FDI to these sectors. Also, of course, decarbonization and making the sector, the industrial sector in Tunisia more competitive. Lots also should be done on this. In other words, integrating more Tunisia in the green value chain and in higher value added activities rather than only low value added or concentrating only on the energy sector. So in many interviews that I conducted in Tunisia and also in Morocco, which of course has a more, let's say, successful transition in terms of integrating other sectors also to the renewable sector. I heard that there are concerns on the sufficiency of retraining programs. And of course, such a massive structural change that is entailed in decarbonization and the green transition generally would require retraining programs. Of course, there are programs, but it's always a question of a scale. So there are, of course, again, pilot projects and focusing on successful models that should be later emulated by others and so on. But maybe this is not the ideal case in such a massive program. Also, the idea of engaging local communities in the developmental project as partners, rather than only compensating them for the lands being used for the renewable energy. So I often hear, of course, from officials that, and I'm sure also that the EU is doing like social and environmental impact assessment for projects that would take care about in the environment. But I hear also from the CSOs ideas like, why shouldn't the local communities be partners in this developmental project? Like, for example, being shareholders in whatever projects being taken. Why don't they benefit from the water? Why setting water for the local communities, the use of local communities and agriculture or other means be set as a priority together with producing green hydrogen from the desalinated, plants. Also, yeah, so these are like concerns that go beyond just mere compensation. If the compensation by itself is enough, I mean, local communities, I'm sure it will be taken care of in the next section panel. So, yeah, a more inclusive and sustainable project that would build stronger bonds between the people of the MENA and the EU and would guarantee a long-term commitment to climate change mitigation would probably one that sets the following objectives as very important and again developmental objectives. So one of them is fostering competitiveness and upgrading in the green value chain through decarbonization, green innovation, through startups, also green startups, and fostering local supply industries. Second one would be structural change retraining in order to help this process to take place. And the third would be then local communities development and taking care of their demands. And thanks all.
Great. Thank you very much, Mohammed. I think, I retain 3 key points here as well, that perhaps one of the key issues is for us to think about in Tunisia as we try to think, is the energy transition taking place really a just transition? Is how do we better integrate Tunisia in the green value chain? And I think this is something we'll come back to later when we talk about Morocco, which has had more years of experience and is seen as a pioneer of trying to move up the value chain. There is the issue of, as you mentioned, the how do we think about energy transition as a developmental tool for a country like Tunisia? What does that mean in terms of retraining programs? What is the right scale? Can we upscale? And finally, the issue, which obviously the second panel later will get into, which is how do you better integrate local communities? So can we think of models that go beyond compensation to create value for the communities, either perhaps as shareholders, but perhaps as well and more as an approach of development as liberation type of approach, this idea of using the fact that particularly in southern Tunisia, you could have access perhaps to more accessible, cheap, clean energy to finally allow Tunisia to integrate local communities that have been historically marginalized. We're going to shift now countries and actors and move to Lebanon and to Salim Mohana. But Salim is the program leader for sustainable development sectors in the World Bank, cover the MENA Mashriq countries, so not just Lebanon. And I think this is a really good segue because Salim in his work is not just looking at the sector of energy, but also water, agriculture, urban resilience, environment, and social development sectors. And he's also the focal point on climate change for a region that has massive governance issues and huge needs. So Salim, I mean, shifting to you, really, this conversation is very much energy transition and thinking of it as a development tool, as a development objective. And I know the World Bank is increasingly looking at it that way. So can you tell us a bit from your standpoint at the World Bank, how you are, which energy projects you're prioritizing? How are you thinking of them in terms of the value chain, economic value chain? But particularly given that you're working in countries that are where governance is a challenge, shall we say? What is the scale? I mean, I think we're moving from North Africa, big projects. There was a clear sector. In Lebanon, we saw an explosion, sorry, bad use of term in the context of Lebanon. We saw a proliferation of solar panels, but it was very private, very, I don't even want to use the word microgrids. I mean, individual grids without any incentives, without any regulation, out of absolute need. So yeah, if you can just tell us how you're thinking about energy projects, link them to development, the scale of these projects, maybe in a country where I keep hearing, oh, but this is not bankable, private sector is not bankable these days, municipalities are not bankable, institutions, we can't loan, we don't know how to do it. How are you linking this to development, but also to broader development agenda and governance agenda in terms of jobs, this green value chain? And perhaps your thoughts about how you do your job in the context of war and conflict in terms of financing. So easy questions.
Thank you. Thanks. I think first, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be on this panel. Maybe I will start by saying, what do countries want? I think that's a fundamental question. I think we're missing a little bit on in this conversation. And by country, I don't mean governments. I mean as a whole of a society and ecosystem. So what do they really want? Beyond the trends, beyond the politics, beyond opportunism, beyond by fund-driven initiatives, and beyond what is infiltrated to them in terms of knowledge, be it on technology, be it on choices, etc. So really, there's a fundamental question that needs to be asked at some point. And I'm a little bit surprised we don't have anyone from government in this room, but that's maybe a choice. But it's interesting to really understand what's driving them, where are they going, what choices are they taking, for what purpose, and those are really big uncertainties that even us who work with governments directly tend to find that quite challenging. But I tried to frame it in 8 points. I'll run through them very quickly. The first one is, what's the current situation? On the macro side, macroeconomic, on budget, on deficit issues, be it on trade deficit, be it on budget deficit. What's their energy mix today, their energy situation in terms of sector? What are the nexuses that make sense to them and that are challenging to them, such as, you know, the energy-water nexus, like Jordan, other nexuses, maybe on the agriculture, energy nexus, like in Morocco. And what are the industries that could benefit from this transition? Are our countries industrialized? Are we gonna modernize any sector along the way with the transition process that we are taking? Today, Tunisia is at 2% renewables. It's aiming at 35. How ambitious that is, you know, how realistic. Lebanon, which is a country falling behind in almost all dimensions. There is not even a minimum load in the system to be able to introduce renewables into it. So, you know, you can have a target of 40%, but without a minimum load, that 40% is just disappears in the network. So how do you create renewable systems in this kind of environment? Outdated grids, outdated systems, a generator cartel, of course, that somehow influences political decision-making, political deadlocks. And of course, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Huge, as you mentioned, that maybe private-led solarization in programs in Lebanon in households, at household level, that will pose a lot of question marks on the viability of even an energy transition as a country as a whole. In Iraq, gas flaring, which also is a major issue that needs to be integrated also into that. The choice of scenario within this reality, what's our choice of scenarios? Are those really win-wins? Are they wins to the country that is designing those scenarios for itself and the countries who can benefit also from this mix of scenario? The grids between Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, and Europe are a good example of that. Are those win-wins? I think they could be win-wins, but what are the real conditions for them? Renewables need integration to be able to scale. You know, today in Morocco, they have capped somehow the renewable capability. So they need to integrate better with Europe so that they're able to move above the 40% cap that they are at. Same thing would go to many countries in the region. And be it integration with Europe, but also integration with themselves. And I think the Arab world is maybe the least integrated region in the world, politically, socially, and also economically, but also today, when it comes to technology, to infrastructure, I think we're reaching somehow the cap of what technical solutions can do without politics. And you know, there is a fundamental question to that that we need to think through. Availability of public and potentially private capital. You know, almost this transition should be led by private capital. You know, in each scenario, when you look in each country scenario, you have between 85 to 90% expected to come from private sector. Are those realistic? Who's going to invest today billions of dollars in specific countries in the region in terms of private capital? And if private capital doesn't come, is public capital the right way to do it? To compensate for the gap of private capital instead of fixing your nuts and bolts and creating a real attractive investment environment for the private sector to come in, but really going through the easy and just do everything by public money. And this public money that's extremely scarce and almost unavailable. Just an example, Morocco, the private sector investment expected in Morocco, which is the most realistic in the entire region to happen, is around $20 billion to reach their next target. So how do we get there? In Lebanon alone, the generation capacity in the scenarios are from private sector, requiring almost $4 billion by 2035. So, you know, knowing Lebanon today also, how do you get there? Governance, you mentioned that. Governance is a major issue. Today, we're counting on the institutions of the past to deliver the energy of the future. So can this be done? What are the reforms needed? Those are reforms not only institutionally, but also eventually political reforms, organizational reforms, tariff reforms, anything that we can imagine needs to be thought through and not just trying to, plug in, new technology into old systems. It could work to a certain extent, but it's a huge missed opportunity. Of course, the controversial topic of cost recovery, sustainability of those investments. Renewable in terms of operating costs is less than, fossil fuel production. But who's paying for the capital investment? Who's paying for potentially upgrading of systems in 10, 15 years, and maybe a change of systems and change of technology? I think there is a real reality in the MENA region that who pays for bills. And except, of course, for one or two countries in the region, almost all of them subsidize the energy. So who's really investing, and how to attract the private sector in an environment where almost no one pays for the real cost of what they consume? So there is a big question mark there. Of course, there is a question of equity associated to that. There is a question of poverty. There is a question of capacity even of our economies and our societies to pay for a huge energy transition. But that's an important conversation that needs to be had, because that links eventually to the strategy that we're trying to imagine for our countries, to the vision, to the investment needs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, without thinking really seriously about the financial sustainability of almost all of the highly deficient utilities in the region. We really need to think about, or energy utilities, I mean, we really need to think about who's going to pick up that bill eventually. You mentioned the job creation, very interesting. Morocco expects 300,000 new jobs with their new plans. I also want to put a question mark here. What kind of jobs? And also, we're chatting around this last week. The Arab world missed almost all revolutions except for the agricultural revolution in terms of being a major contributor and a major partner and a major value adder. I don't think that word exists, but in terms of bringing value into those revolutions. We missed the industrial one, we missed the tech one, and now we might be missing the climate revolution and the energy revolution. So can we be part of it? Can we still capture part of that train that's almost passing, to not only be consumers and installers of energy and creating jobs through installation and maintenance and cleaning solar panels and all of those we like to put in the reports, but actually being part of the technology creation, to the creation of solutions. I think that's a fundamental and a big question that Arab countries need to think through, because they will need to reform their education sectors. They need to think about modern ways of how to link this energy transition to their whole of economy and whole of society. And that links, of course, to close the loop, maybe, that's my final point, inclusion, transparency, accountability in choices and in processes and in changes, and a dynamic capacity to change is going to be expected in an environment where technology is fastly changing, scenarios are fastly changing, and if we're unable to adapt, if we're unable to surf those transitions, I think we're going to not be able to close the loop and be stuck in one technology choice and not being able to adapt to the other. And we're not being able to go back to point one, which is choices, scenarios, strategies, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those 8 points, for me at least, when I was thinking about this session, seems to be important, so that the countries we work with don't get stuck into only supply-driven solutions, but also are able to shape their own narrative. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you very much, Salim. I think you really opened up a lot of questions for us on many levels, and maybe I think you got to the core of what we're trying to do, which is the energy transition is not about technical solutions. It's not just about increasing supply. It's about what choices does a society make, and in fragmented governance countries, how do you reach these decisions, and then how do you deploy it? And I think there's a recurrent theme here, which is this idea of, in those choices, how do we make sure that in the region, we don't just become, I would say, first level consumers or first level producers, but actually think about energy transition as a revolution, as a transformative moment. And what would that mean in terms of who benefits, how, And one issue I think you highlighted, it's the issue of inclusion, transparency, and accountability. And I think that's a good segue to our next speaker, Diana Al-Qaisi. Hi, Diana, who's joining us from Beirut online. And Diana is the former executive director of LOGI, the Lebanese Oil and Gas Initiative. She sits still on their advisory board, but more globally, she has been working now for years to push for and to advocate and to push for more transparency and accountability in the governance of natural resources. Diana, as I turn to you to talk a bit about Lebanon, the major governance issues, and Salim highlighted some of them. What are the sort of choices? If you can tell us a bit your perspective on how can a country like Lebanon, from your experience, the years you spent advocating on this, ensure better governance, ensure better discussions around the technological issues necessary to adopt renewable energies, but also if in your own work you came across, when we talk about governance in highly fragmented countries, how do we include usually the communities that are not present at the table? How do we ensure that there's a broader range of stakeholders that can at least participate in the conversation of what we want to achieve? The floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'm so sorry I wasn't able to join you, but you know, things are what they are. And also thank you so much for the speakers that I just heard. I think they gave a great segue, especially Salim. Shukran. Thank you so much for the for just laying down the scene and really explaining well what is happening, not only in Lebanon, but of course across MENA. So from my part, I'm going to focus on Lebanon, tackling, of course, what you put on the table. Let me start with, I think, where Salim left off. Our main problem, governance problem in Lebanon, is the absence of a political will to find a sustainable solution for power generation. We are not lacking in laws. We are not lacking in technical solutions. And I will be bold enough to say that at one point, we were not even lacking in financing, whether from the World Bank or others. The problem was political will, the absence of that, the emergence and the existence of cartels that are hijacking every single decision, especially when it comes to power generation, and the widespread corruption that we have. That is not only preventing us from, you know, reaching sustainable power generation goals, going for cleaner energy and so far, but also is preventing us from having a real discussion. And the proof for that is that as a country, we still don't have one comprehensive, agreed upon, inclusive national strategy for energy. We don't. We have bits and pieces, we have efforts, we have pieces of that puzzle, but we literally have a finger in every pie. We want to, you know, extract oil and gas. We have, you know, national action plans for energy efficiency. I think they're fantastical. We have, you know, EDL that needs all the help it can get. It's literally crippled. And I'm going to get to that in a second. We have our own ideas about, you know, how to go ahead and develop our renewable energy capacity. But we don't have that within a comprehensive plan. So we don't know in which direction to put all our efforts, and this is being captured and abused by the cartels that are literally benefiting from this absence. On the ground, if I want to go back on the ground, yes, during the past 3 to 4 years, because of the complete collapse and the near complete stop of power or energy providing from EDL, the people or individual efforts had to step up so people can generate power and electricity from renewable energy, especially solar panels. But this is mostly on an individual basis. And it is highly unjust because only those that can afford it are actually going for the solution. And this leaves communities, you know, in a big partition those, and I can cite, for example, one village of Tula that a lot of people now know about. They gathered some money, they had a lot of people in the diaspora, they put together and they managed to, through private financing, to set up a solar power farm. And they generate, and they supported this through a private generator. Now they have almost 24/7 electricity, good for them, but that's completely on their own. On the other hand, I can cite many villages that are almost down to zero electricity power generation, and they don't have the means. This is how discrepant the whole scene is. Now, this is, of course, leading to so many social inequalities. I don't need to point that out. There are projects funded by the international community, such as INARA, such as others, that are trying, but again, they cannot cover all Lebanon. They can cover only parts and bits and pieces of Lebanon. And this, again, falls under the Department of completely unjust. But again, beggars can be choosers. This is what is being offered to us at the moment. And this is happening. And please don't let us kid ourselves under a lot of pressure put on the cartels and the political parties, so they allow such things to happen. It is not an easy thing for any funder to come to Lebanon and simply implement a project. There are a lot of red lines that they have to cross, a lot of political figures that they have to get their okay from. So that's a very important point to also point out. When it comes to the legal perspective, we have the legal framework. So in writing, if we look at it, the legal framework is there, so we are able to generate, whether individually or off-grid through solar farms, we are able to generate, or we can generate under the legal framework, energy from renewable sources, especially solar. But are we able to implement? No, because within this legal framework, there are still articles put there simply to cripple great laws that, they are great because they're on paper. One example that I can give is regarding, two laws that I think most people who are dealing with Lebanon know of. It's Law 462 and the new law, the DRE, the Distributed Renewable Energy Law. On paper, they're good. Have they been able to be implemented? No, because they are all tied to the existence of an electricity regulatory authority that up to date is being fought hand and foot by political entities for it not to exist. The scale of how crippled we are is huge. But let's look at what we can really do. I know there are efforts, again, by different entities, not only pointing at the World Bank, that are trying one step at a time to support the existing systems that we have, to enhance them, such as EDL, to work on the system failure that they have, to enhance departments so they can handle renewable energy production. They are trying. We're always hoping for the best. We have reached the point where we are still hoping that a complete failure will actually lead to some kind of, opening, paving the way for such efforts. When it comes to, again, going back to the governance issues, I want to highlight a certain opportunity that we believe can exist. And I think it was touched upon also by my former colleagues who were speaking, and it is the startups, the entrepreneurs, and all the wonderful opportunity that will exist for the youth, and especially women, not only in Lebanon, across MENA, in order to benefit from the energy transition that we're having. One thing that we can, very positively focus on is supporting such initiatives, creating investment funds. Lebanon would be a great example to do so, because I see a lot of individualized efforts on startups, so they can be funded. And I think this is the only way to break out of the deadlock of the cartel that we have. That would be one good way forward. That would be, again, if I want to refer to the chair's comments on how do you think we can include communities. If I want to break down communities to who are we talking about, let's target fresh graduates, students, entrepreneurs, women fresh graduates, those that are graduating from STEM. This is one community that we need to be more inclusive of through creating investment funds for these that will enable them to benefit from energy transition and to contribute more to more sustainable solutions to power generation in Lebanon. That's one concrete example. And that's my final note, because we spoke about Tunisia. I know we're going to speak also about Morocco, and I'm speaking now about Lebanon. There is a certain network that has been created that is focusing on ensuring that female STEM educated females in particular are able to benefit justly from the energy transition happening across MENA. Certain local chapters under the regional network in energy for women, Renew MENA, has been created in Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, and soon in many other countries. I'm hoping Lebanon, once things stabilize. These focus on opening opportunities for women, especially, and somebody mentioned STEG. STEG is part of Renew MENA, with a pledge to open opportunities for females to be onboarded, to be upskilled, so nobody, when it comes to energy transition, is left behind, and that energy transition in MENA will indeed be a just one. So I will stop here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you very much, Diana. And please stay safe, and really thank you for inspiring us. And I was actually, as moderator, worried about how am I going to make the transition from Lebanon to Egypt, but in a way you actually made it very easy, because I'm actually sitting next to one of those entrepreneurs. Ahmed Zahran is CEO and co-founder of Karm Solar, one of the most prominent solar energy developers for the private sector in Egypt. But also, and I think that also links up to how you include different segments of society, he was also a co-founder and former board director of Nahdat al-Mahrousa, one of the largest youth-run NGOs in Egypt. So in a way, he's here with almost a double hat. First, as a private sector that is producing a lot of renewable energy today in Egypt, and in a context perhaps different than what we discussed, but I think there were a number of things that you heard today, Ahmed, that I would love to have your take as someone from the private sector. How involved are you? How did you address some of the issues that, for instance, Salim was addressing, the pricing, the equity? Do you feel that you are able to create these high-value jobs? Do you feel as actually by producing renewable energy, you're not just producing energy, but you're actually part of a bigger value chain that might be taking place in Egypt? How are you able, as well as someone who obviously tried to empower youth and so forth, do you see the potential of this energy transition to bring in and provide good jobs for Egyptian youth? And yeah, are there benefits to local communities from renewable projects? And can you think of examples of how the private sector can also be one of these actors? 10 minutes as well. Thank you.
I think the starting point of any work about just transition or investment in renewable energy or the infrastructure in general has to do with the design. And the main question is, what are we designing for? If we are talking about the inclusion of as many actors as possible in the just energy transition, from oil and gas towards renewable energy, and at the same time from central generation to distributed generation, then the way we are seeing it at the company and the way that we're trying to solve it, we are tackling it as a design problem. So what we realized is that the existing infrastructure, the way that it was designed and the way that it is operating, is giving an advantage to fossil fuels in general. It was not designed for renewable energy. So even if you have the intention, you have the financial and technical capabilities to implement as many renewable energy projects as you want, you would realize that you would not be able to implement whatever you're planning. So one of the main issues that we tackled is the design of the regulations and whether it helps or not, the design of the power system, whether on the generation side or on the distribution side. We are lucky that in Egypt, the regulations offered us a good starting point because it does not prohibit us from investing both in power generation and power distribution, which is something that is not usually the norm. Within the energy investment in many countries, you're either within the generation side, the distribution side, or you own the cable. And in Egypt, this issue is not there. The main advantage of that is that it allowed us to think of the design of the system holistically during the entire lifetime of the kilowatt hour, from generation until its final consumption. It also allowed us to think of all types of consumers and all types of generators without discrimination. So for us, because in our systems, a factory, a farm, a shop, and a household are all connected to the same system, and they're all thought of economically and technically in the same way, the type of developments and solutions we were able to think of were tackling all of their needs at the same time. What I can tell you that is going to happen within the coming 10 to 15 years is that the use of our infrastructure is going to change. The use of the power grid is going to be significantly different. We are currently working on the export of many of the concepts that we're developing to other countries in the region, including Cyprus, hopefully Tunisia, and other places. But let me give you some idea of what is going to be happening. The use of the power grid will shift from centralized generation to distributed generation. Now, why is that happening? Because the economics of central generation in the first place started when the cost of generation was higher than the cost of investment of distribution. What is happening today is that the cost of generation, the capital economics of generation is falling rapidly because of renewable energy. And thus, it doesn't make sense anymore to centralize the generation. It makes more sense to just, produce my own energy and consume it where it is generated, which means that the power grid theoretically can become obsolete within 50 to 100 years. Now, we don't think this is going to happen because the use of the power grid is going to change. It will no longer be a method or a tool to transfer kilowatt hours from the best place to generate, which is a centralized place, to different consumers. It will be used to balance the system. It will be used for financial transactions. It will be used to develop credit scores for everyone across the system. But most importantly, it will be used to democratize the generation of kilowatt hours. And that, poses an important question. And it's one of the questions that we love working on. And I think we're going to get somewhere with it. How do you differentiate between a utility-sized power plant and a solar rooftop at home? How can you enable both to interact together within a market that allows for both to be partners? How do you handle that in terms of power distribution and energy trading? There are a lot of questions around it. It is doable. I mean, there is nothing in terms of technology that is challenging to develop to have a system like that, but it means that the distribution of power and influence across the system is going to change dramatically. And let me mention here an important thing. The power that oil and gas has is the power of supply, because you need to produce the oil every single day. You need to produce the gas every single day. So the dependency that is created gives them a lot of power versus the consumers. Whereas when it comes to renewable energy, there's no fuel. All the components of the power generation, power consumption, and power management can exist with the consumer. And that changes the game dramatically, and it changes the balance of power in a great way. The whole challenge is what type of design and what type of system can do that? And how do you change that into a business model, a viable business model that can be implemented? And that's what we're working on. What are the products and services that you can offer? And I'll give you a very small example of something that we've done. We've piloted for the past 2 years, and it actually worked quite well. The idea of the power meter and how it can be used as a method of proving my worthiness of participation in the system. So we started talking to financial institutions and asking them, can you use the power usage metrics of different shops and cafes and SMEs to understand their credit worthiness? Can you develop a credit score out of the power bill of SMEs? And they said yes. If the power consumption is related to the type of business they're doing, and that's the case for restaurants, for example, cafes and some other types of businesses, we can do that. So we told them, we're going to open up the system for you so you can understand the power consumption trends of those businesses, those SMEs, and we're going to show you their payment history, whether they pay on time or not, and when is what is the seasonality like, and so on. We managed in extending loans over the power bill, with the power meter becoming the collateral. And I'm talking here about a lot of unbankable SMEs using the power infrastructure. Now, that's the beauty of having a power meter linked to a physical location that you can visit, that you can see, that you can assess what the energy is being used for. That's the value of the data that allowed those people to benefit from the power system in a way that was not possible before. And we started extending those loans through those financial institutions. And we saw that actually they are paying their loans, that almost all of them got renewed, and it became a revolving credit. Again, that's based on power, that is related to the power bill. So whenever they're paying their power bill, it has one part related to the consumption of energy and another part related to the credit that they deserve because of how well they manage their power bill and power consumption. Now, there are many other things that are going to happen in the same direction that is really going to change the use of the power grid. And that's what we are investing in, because if you want to reach, 50% renewable energy on the system, it's not just a question of technical abilities, because those are going to be solved, but it's also a question of the design of the system that will allow the different parties connected to the system to get that done. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Ahmed. I think you're also forcing us to think about the design, but also maybe bring into a conversation another element, which is, can, in a way, the model of how energy, if it becomes decentralized, and can it make people perhaps who've been more excluded, non-bankable, have access to capital, and is that going to help in their sort of ability to do projects? I think that's something, frankly, I had never thought about, but very, very interesting. And I think now we're going to move to Karim Shukri, who's a fellow at the Moroccan Institute for Policy Analysis, one of our partners on the project in Morocco, but also a professor at University Hassan II, and really an expert on energy transition and energy dynamics in Morocco. Morocco has already come up in a number of interventions today. It's widely seen in the region as perhaps the country that has so far managed to benefit from this whole talk about nearshoring, friendshoring, of sort of trying to move up the value chain. At least in the conversations when we follow, it seems that the Moroccan authorities have more of a strategy about how to industrialize around some of this cheaper energy. But it's also one of the countries that was a pioneer in massive solar power plants. And some of them we later discovered, and there was a lot of comment about it, that how you use water to even clean solar panel hadn't been fully thought out. The issue of job creation as well, there were lessons that were brought because while these massive solar power plants were being built, there were jobs. And then once they were built, there were very few jobs left. And so we also saw some tensions around land use between local communities and these big. So I think really Morocco in a way is at least from us at everyone, we look at it as a laboratory of a lot of these ideas of how policy gets set with whom, with what gets corrected, what doesn't get corrected. So we'd love to hear from you now about, what are some of the projects being implemented? What are some of the key lessons that you take from your experience, say, okay, this is what we can take from the Moroccan experience to ensure that whatever energy transition is taking place in other countries is more just, but also this is where Morocco is at today, and this is what we're doing well, and this is what needs more effort.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, c'était un grand plaisir pour moi pour participer à cette réunion aujourd'hui. Donc, bien sûr, lorsqu'on parle du Maroc, à l'instar de la majorité des pays de la région MENA, nous sommes un pays qui est pauvre en ressources fossiles, mais heureusement, nous sommes riches en ressources humaines. Et d'ailleurs, c'est pour ça, depuis 2009, le Maroc a lancé sa première stratégie énergétique, qu'on l'appelle aujourd'hui notre révolution énergétique. C'était le moment où on a décidé de commencer à développer les énergies renouvelables avec le premier programme ambitieux de développer environ 6000 MW entre le solaire, l'éolien et l'hydraulique. Bien sûr, apparemment, je pensais à un problème. Ah, c'est bon, ok, désolé. Donc, le cadre réglementaire constitue un pilier important pour le développement et la réussite des projets d'énergie renouvelable. Donc, c'est pour ça, depuis 2009, qu'on a commencé à libéraliser le secteur des énergies renouvelables à travers la publication de la loi 1309, une loi très promoteuse qui a donné la première fois au niveau africain, au secteur privé, de développer leur propre installation de production d'électricité et de vendre de l'électricité directement aux consommateurs, ou bien sûr, dans ce schéma, l'État est en charge uniquement au transport de cet électron produite. Donc, durant ces 14 ans, donc, on y est arrivé à augmenter et à multiplier fois 20 notre capacité de production d'énergie renouvelable. On était environ à 200 MW installés dans les années 2009. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes environ à 4500 MW des projets qui sont opérationnels et qui divident de l'énergie de notre réseau. Et bien sûr, il y a un nombre important de projets qui sont en phase de réalisation et d'autres en phase de développement pour atteindre une capacité de plus de 52% à l'horizon 2030. Donc ça, c'est pour le volet réglementaire. Bien sûr, en plus du volet réglementaire, on a donné beaucoup d'importance au volet institutionnel et à la mise à niveau de nos instituts afin d'accompagner notre transition énergétique, notamment par la création de la Moroccan Agency for Sustainable Energy, la MASEN, qui est en charge de développement de l'ensemble des projets d'énergie renouvelable aujourd'hui au Maroc. Et en plus de la MASEN, bien sûr, parmi les objectifs principaux de notre stratégie énergétique, c'est pas uniquement de produire le kilowattheure. Il y a d'autres volets, notamment le volet capacity building, formation et le volet recherche. Donc c'est pour ça, en plus de développement des projets et de développement, bien de l'amélioration de notre réglementaire, on a continué à enrichir notre volet en formation par la création de plusieurs filières pour les ingénieurs et les techniciens en énergie renouvelable, le développement des instituts dédiés à la recherche et l'innovation dans ce domaine. Donc à partir, durant toutes ces années, bien sûr, c'est un développement et c'est une transition qui est progressive. On a eu l'occasion d'avoir plusieurs phases et plusieurs phases d'évaluation de sa stratégie, notamment en 2015, qu'on a commencé à revoir notre stratégie. On a posé la question de l'eau aussi. pour tout ce qui est grand central, l'utilisation de l'eau vu la rareté. Et donc, c'est dans cette année-là, il y avait des grandes décisions, notamment pour le changement des technologies utilisées pour éviter tout ce qui est nettoyage à travers par l'eau. Donc, je parle ici de Nord 2 et Nord 3. Ce sont maintenant des projets qui sont opérationnels et qui n'utilisent pas l'eau comme un moyen pour le nettoyage des panneaux et des miroirs, etc. Et en plus de ça, bien sûr, on a continué à ouvrir le secteur parce qu'au début, on a commencé uniquement par la haute tension et la très haute tension. Mais avec la réussite de cette ouverture et la réussite de cette privatisation ou bien de cette libéralisation du marché, on a continué à libéraliser les autres niveaux de tension avec l'accompagnement, bien sûr, de la Commission européenne et de nos partenaires européens dans ce domaine. Donc, en plus de l'ouverture de tout ce qui est moyenne tension et prochainement de la basse tension, bien sûr, il y avait aussi des améliorations au niveau de notre paysage énergétique à travers la création d'une agence de la régulation, l'autorité nationale de la régulation de l'électricité, qui joue aujourd'hui le rôle de régulateur du secteur en présence des acteurs privés et des acteurs étatiques dans notre réseau d'électricité. Donc, en 2018-2019, on a commencé, bien sûr, à réfléchir autrement parce qu'on a dépassé la question de l'autonomie ou bien de produire pour notre besoin, pour notre propre besoin en énergie électrique. Et puisqu'on a notre capacité à dépasser largement le besoin ou bien la demande nationale, donc on a commencé à réfléchir sur la question de l'export de l'énergie électrique. Et d'ailleurs, aujourd'hui, il y a des avancées énormes avec l'Union européenne, notamment à travers les 7 roadmaps, Sustainable Electricity Trade Roadmap, entre le Maroc, la France, l'Espagne, le Portugal et l'Allemagne, oui, exactement. Donc, qui va permettre au Maroc de transporter, d'exporter son électricité verte au marché européen, qui est un marché qui présente beaucoup d'opportunités pour le secteur. Donc, en plus de ça, bien sûr, il y a un volet très important aujourd'hui, c'est celui de l'hydrogène vert et de dessalement de l'eau de mer. Donc, bien sûr, le Maroc, on a vu une certaine rareté de la molécule d'eau. Donc, c'est pour ça qu'on a commencé à développer et encourager les projets de dessalement d'eau de mer qui utilisent des énergies renouvelables. Et d'ailleurs, une grande centrale de dessalement, elle est déjà en phase de réalisation à Casablanca. Ça sera la plus grande. Une autre à Agadir. Tous ces 2 centrales, bien sûr, aujourd'hui, ils vont utiliser de l'énergie éolienne pour produire de l'eau salée, de l'eau dessalée, pardon. Donc, un autre point que je veux souligner, c'est celui de l'hydrogène vert. Bien sûr, avec la présence, ou bien avec le potentiel énorme en énergie renouvelable qui va nous donner la capacité de produire d'une manière continue et constante de l'hydrogène vert. Donc, le Maroc a publié dernièrement son offre hydrogène dédiée aux investisseurs internationaux qui souhaitent à investir et à développer des projets de production de l'hydrogène au Maroc. Et bien sûr, cette offre, elle constituait une opportunité multicritères, notamment par la mise en disponibilité de tout ce qui est foncier, la disponibilité de réseaux électriques, l'accompagnement juridique et financier au niveau, soit à travers le Maroc, soit à travers les instituts internationaux, et aussi en mandatant l'Amazon comme un guichet unique pour les investisseurs internationaux. Un autre point que j'aimerais bien souligner, c'est celui de la progressivité de la transition énergétique. En 2009, lorsqu'on a commencé à développer notre stratégie énergétique, le grand souci, c'était la production de l'électricité, de l'électron et le coût de sa production. Mais bien sûr, c'était l'école classique des énergies renouvelables, lorsqu'on développe des énergies renouvelables, il y a d'intermittence, donc il y a un problème de sécurité sur la sécurité d'approvisionnement de pays. Mais dans les années 2020-2021, on a commencé à apprendre la leçon autrement. Parce que le moment où une grande partie des pays ont commencé à mettre en cause leur modèle énergétique, aussi ils ont mettre en cause la question du charbon et du gaz suite à la situation internationale. Donc bien sûr au Maroc, heureusement, il n'y avait pas de gazoduc du soleil ou bien du gazoduc du vent qu'on peut couper. Donc, personne n'a arrivé à couper le rayon solaire à arriver au Maroc ou bien au vent pour souffler. Donc, on a continué à produire de l'électricité. On a continué à stabiliser notre réseau sans aucun impact direct lié à la situation au niveau du marché international. Donc, je pense globalement, c'est ce que je veux partager avec vous sur notre modèle énergétique. Et merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Karim. Thank you very much. I think it's important to bring into this perspective of the sequencing. And as we think about other countries, what sequencing looks like. And I just want to tell everyone, so the next panel will really look at how can we push for more local community invoicing. I think this panel, we want to really thank our panelists who gave us a broad view of where the region is at, and it's not in one place, and the challenges are quite different, but I think it gives us an idea of the sorts of projects, where different countries are, where different sectors, from the private sector to the public sector and so forth. I want to open it now to questions. I know we're running a bit late, but we started a bit late. So if people online want to ask a question, I think you can just press, raise your hand. And if anyone here wants to do it as well, just raise your hand and I will take notes. Please, if people can also introduce themselves when they ask.
Okay. Push it. My name is Daniela Socacciu, and I'm working with Christina for the time being at the headquarters at the B2. But before I've had a position. I had a position at the delegation of Palestine in Jerusalem, and I was working on energy. So what surprised me most today is that there were very many discussions about energy in different countries, Mediterranean countries, which are slightly different from one country to another. We can see that energy is a very complex topic. It's not simple. It depends on governance. It depends on technology. It depends on regulations. It depends on all these resources. I would say natural resources, which are producing the energy, which are the base of energy production. So all these problems are more or less the same everywhere. What we haven't discussed today, it's something which is surprising to me, because for me the civil society could do a lot in this sense, is the energy efficiency. The energy efficiency is not only let's say, an audit of energy, we do an audit and then, no, it's a resource, I would say, of energy. Energy efficiency, which should be implemented everywhere. It's huge how much it could change. And the best to me is that civil society is the one who can raise awareness on this, because most of the people believe that energy efficiency means let's do savings, or is not this. It's not about this. Energy efficiency is about how to consume better and do the same thing by consuming less, and this is essential for people to understand. It's not saving like just, and of course, using technologies, using smart meters, which are important, using all sorts of appliances, which are less consuming. All this could be, it's a part of the energy transition, I would say. And I haven't heard a lot about it. And yeah, this is my first question, and I would like to hear more. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to see if there are other questions, so we'll take them in a row, please, and then don't forget to introduce yourself.
Oui, bonjour. Moi, c'est Alessia Tibol de l'organisation COSPE. C'est une des 6 organisations qui fait partie du parcours du dialogue régional, société civile, Union européenne, région MENA. Je veux m'adresser directement aux collègues et l'intervenant du Maroc. Donc, je m'adresse en français. Merci pour l'intervention. En fait, je voulais avoir un peu un point de vue, une appréciation de votre perspective du projet qui est en cours, qui a eu plusieurs phases liées à la centrale solaire de Ouarzazate. Quel type d'impact sur la communauté, quel type de... On en est conscient qu'il y en a un impact assez important, assez dramatique aussi. Et donc, je voulais un peu comprendre votre point de vue à ces propos. Merci.
Merci, Alessia. Une question et après, je reviens au panel.
Good morning. My name is San Bilal. I'm from ECDPM, a think tank working on European external relations and development, and in particular in Africa. I had 2 quick questions. Once we've focused a lot in the panel discussion on the need for energy also of Arab countries, but the investments of Europe are also in order to have more energy going, green energy going from the Arab world to Europe. So how do we best reconcile these mutually beneficial? I think you started the roundtable with these kind of questions, but if the Arab countries are exporting their energy towards Europe, are they not reducing or depriving their own populations from energy? And how do we reconcile this? The second question is perhaps more based on the experience of Egypt, where you have this NOAFE platform on Nexus Water, Food and Energy platform as a way to attract investments. And I was wondering, what is your experience with that? Is that a model that is replicable? Because it is comprehensive and focusing on a nexus approach and combining governance and different approaches. Is that something that is first working in Egypt, and could that be replicated in other Arab countries as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to the panel. There are a number of questions, and we have to wrap up in 8 minutes, our session. So there was a question about energy efficiency. I mean, I don't know if who would like to intervene on that. Let's start with this one. Anyone wants to talk about energy efficiency and if you see it as a key pillar? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Donc, je peux réagir premièrement sur le point relatif à l'efficacité énergétique, notamment pour le cas marocain. Donc, pour nous, bien sûr, en parallèle avec la stratégie énergétique, il n'y avait pas uniquement le développement des énergies renouvelables, mais aussi le renforcement de l'efficacité énergétique. C'est vrai, au début, entre 2009 jusqu'à 2016, il y avait des retards sur la question de l'efficacité énergétique parce qu'elle est globalement liée au financement. Parce que c'est facile de financer un projet de production de l'énergie renouvelable, c'est parce que c'est un produit qu'on va vendre directement. Mais pour l'efficacité énergétique, au début, c'était pas assez facile. Mais à partir de 2016, qu'il y avait une révision de la stratégie énergétique dans son volet efficacité énergétique, c'est le moment où on a considéré l'efficacité énergétique comme une source d'énergie. Premièrement, et avec l'appui des instituts, notamment la Burde, j'aimerais bien souligner ici la Burde et aussi quelques instituts européens, on a commencé à mettre à la disponibilité de nos industriels des fonds pour le financement des activités, premièrement tout ce qui est efficacité énergétique, et aussi on a créé la notion des ESCO, des Energy Service Company, ça veut dire des acteurs privés qui sont prêts à investir au niveau industriel, chez l'industriel, faire toutes les mesures d'efficacité énergétique, investir dans le matériel et dans le management de l'énergie, mais l'industrie concernée, il ne paie rien, à 0 dirham. Alors que le remboursement de l'investissement, c'est à travers les l'énergie gagnée ou bien l'énergie qu'on n'a pas consommée. Donc c'est pour ça c'est un système assez développé aujourd'hui au Maroc et ça fait juste, je pense, ça fait le mois dernier qu'on a vraiment concrétisé la notion de ces ESCO qui sont aujourd'hui opérationnels. Et aussi j'aimerais bien souligner qu'au niveau marocain, on a une agence dédiée à l'efficacité énergétique dont le champ principal c'est de travailler sur les projets d'efficacité énergétique au niveau étatique pour que l'État donne l'exemple. Donc aujourd'hui, au niveau de nos ministères, au niveau de tout établissement public, il y a plusieurs mesures d'efficacité énergétique qui sont déjà intégrées afin de donner l'exemplarité aussi, afin de booster le marché de l'efficacité énergétique. Concernant le deuxième point relatif à la centrale Ouarzazate, et notamment le volet de tout ce qui est impact local. Donc, ma collègue Monica, dans le deuxième panel, elle va discuter largement ce point. Il va répondre, bien sûr, à la question de l'impact social et local de cette grande centrale sur la communauté locale. Merci beaucoup.
Il y avait d'autres questions, si l'équilibre, sorry. There was the question of the equilibrium as well between, and I think this is really relevant to the Tunisian example. You know, Morocco says, okay, once we got what we need domestically, we thought about exporting. There's a big rush in Tunisia to say export, 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 while they're completely dependent on Algerian gas. And actually, I would say this even reinforces the Algerian political influence, frankly, at this stage in Tunisia. So I don't know if someone wants to talk about this example, and there was a question for you, Ahmed, about Egypt and maybe the nexus. But I don't know as well, Salim, if you want to say anything about the sort of nexus and how people are thinking the World Bank between energy, food, and so forth. But last round, you want to take the Tunisia question or?
I mean, French, I'm not that good in it. So
Okay.
I didn't
If you like,
Oh, Dario, you can do it. That'd be perfect.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question, import and export. Indeed, first thing we should mention, I think it is, for instance, in the case of Tunisia, we have growing demand. There is growing demand, and an important point, it is also the fact that the network, it is under severe stress during summertime, especially. If you look at METSO projections, there is some weeks during summer when the network, it is very much stretched. Everyone living in Tunisia knows that during those weeks during summer, blackouts can actually happen. So the demand and the supply, given especially the technology used now with the ACs, it is just fine. So when it comes to electricity, ELMED, which is this interconnection between Italy and Tunisia, it is exactly to provide Tunisia with electricity during those months, which is most in need, which is mainly about summer. So it means that electricity produced in Sicily, which will avoid curtailment, it will go into Tunisia, and Tunisia will avoid building a new power plant. So this is a great win-win. Tunisia will import like this greener electricity that the one would otherwise use. So I think Tunisia will also avoid building a new combined cycle power plant. So from a climate perspective, this is very sound. And in the perspective of Tunisia having more electricity demand in case, given also that the population was rising until 2 years ago, I think ELMED was the right project. Now, at the same time, as the colleague mentioned, energy efficiency remains key. The prices probably will have to give more signal to support, as the colleague mentioned, awareness of the consumers to use the electricity when it is cheaper. Today, it is not the case. I can tell you from my own case that it is very hard even for myself to read the bill. So I think we can work from that side. On the demand side, there is a lot of work that can be done. Different discussion, I think, when it comes to other sectors of the energy world, because energy, of course, it is not only electricity. So when it comes, for instance, of energy efficiency in transport, energy efficiency in buildings, or energy efficiency for for instance, industries that need a high temperature for their industrial production. The discussion there, it is a little bit different. I don't want to take too much time with this, but essentially, if you think about it, there is some derivatives of electrolyzers. So what can be, for instance, renewable hydrogen, but also green ammonia, they can be used locally in principle. So there can be also there an additionality where one part of the production of green ammonia can be used in some industries in Tunisia. And then in the future, renewable hydrogen can go to Europe. And from Europe, you can get out of there foreign currency, which is very much valuable for Tunisia. Tunisia can reduce some imports of phosphates, for instance, increasing its strategic autonomy, creating jobs instead of importing the goods. So for me there is a very important point to be made about the distinction between electricity and other sources of energy. But as you mentioned, at least in the Tunisian case, yes, we're looking into import and export, but as you rightly pointed out, there is growing demand, which has, first of all, to be met locally. Also with the imports from Italy of greener electricity. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to turn to the panelists. I don't know, Ahmed, if you want to answer the question on Egypt, or Salim, Hamad, if you have any concluding remarks in like 30 seconds or a minute each. I'll start with Ahmed.
So I think you're referring to the NWAFI program of the one that was designed by Rania at the Ministry of International Cooperation. And I think that the brilliance of that project is that, I mean, financially and in terms of incentives, it's a comprehensive project and initiative, and it makes sense. However, when it comes to implementation on the ground, there are a lot of difficulties in terms of finding the type of projects where this can be implemented. Privately, we have a water desalination company that predominantly depends on solar energy because it makes sense and because we found the model to get it done. But there is always a problem once you decide to scale that up and identify projects on a bigger scale. That would also not just apply to the NWAFI program, but also on the hydrogen initiative in Egypt and the other countries of the region. Now, there is a very big push for hydrogen at a time when an important technology question was not answered, because hydrogen and batteries probably will not survive together. It's probably going to be one of them becoming the mainstream technology. And that is not a question that can be answered today. It will probably be answered over the coming 20 to 30 years. And that's why you will find that the bankability and the financing of projects when it comes to hydrogen or batteries is kind of an economic bet and a technology bet at the same time. And those are the type of things that you need to deal with. So yes, sometimes there are government-sponsored initiatives and programs to encourage the investment in certain areas, but they're confronted with scaling and technology questions that are not easy to answer. And that's why it doesn't necessarily work in the way that it was imagined.
Yeah, the electricity exchange with Italy, yes, it can be profitable, especially until the renewable kicks off. I've heard this from officials, but the problem is that land, and especially in Tunisia, is limited and it's already causing tension. This is one thing. And also the production of hydrogen is very demanding in terms of land use. So I was wondering how exporting at the same time meeting the demand, local demand would be balanced. Also, there's problem of desalination, which we haven't spoken about, and this will affect, for example, the fishing industry, the likelihood of the local community fishing communities.
Great, no, thank you. And I think the second panel hopefully will explore some of these issues about community impact and how do you, or mechanisms for community stakeholders. Salim?
Maybe just, I think energy has moved from a mere service to a tradable. So I think that's something we need to, I think, accept and know how to deal with in our set of countries. And the same way you export a car without necessarily fulfilling your total, market needs, we're moving into a world where you're actually having to deal with those tensions, and how you deal with those tensions is important. The same way we export strawberries and we calculate the water loss when we export strawberries from our countries, I think we need to also now integrate land loss, human loss, water loss from exporting energy from one country to the other, to really integrate the large dimensions that are associated with the kilowatt that moves from one place to the other, and not only factor the energy itself. So those are, I think, fundamental questions we need to think of, and this integrates the nexus very well, because energy is no longer only energy; it has numerous arrays associated to it. So thank you.
Thank you, Salim. No, and I'll conclude, but just building on what you said, I think, and maybe it's a good segue for the next session. I mean, if we say energy as a tradable, something that's tradable, then the question becomes, what about the existing power dynamics? And I think this is something, and how do we build systems so you don't end up the imbalances we saw in trade, one's country's inability to do so, particular communities' inabilities to have their perspectives heard, ends up being replicated. But I think, so please stay with us for the second session. I think it would be a really segue, but a good segue to this one. And I want you to join me, please, in really thanking our panelists. A lot of very rich perspectives. I think it shows as well where we are at in the region. It's a region that's really thinking, engaging at different levels with this. And so please, a round of applause, and we will resume in 15 minutes.
Stefano, can you hear me? And could you please try to speak so that we test if we can hear you well?
Which parts of the world?
Stefano?
Yes. Hi.
Yes. Hi. Maybe if you can be a bit closer to the microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. This is all I needed to test. I think we will be starting with a slight delay. So 11:35 or so.
Okay, that's fine. I managed to finish a bit earlier my meeting, so I'm here. No worries.
Okay, perfect.
You can hear me
Salah.
properly. I mean, I can check the
We can hear you
video.
very well here in the hall. Yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay.
And yeah, if you can switch on the camera, it's perfect. I can then show the picture on the screens here.
Yeah, I've just done it, so you should be able to see me.
Yeah, I can see you.
Very good.
Okay, thanks a lot. Talk to you in a
Thanks.
bit.
Yeah, talk to you.
Mr. Kalash, could I ask you to try to speak a little bit so that we can test if we hear you well?
Hi, how are you?
Yes,
Okay.
the sound is very good. Yes. If I understand well, you will be speaking Arabic?
Yes, I
Yes,
will
we will
start
have.
two parentheses in English and then Arabic.
Yes, we will just need to test a bit how well we receive the sound, and we will try to do the simultaneous translation, but maybe we need consecutive translation, but we will explain to you at the start of your intervention if you will need to make pauses for the interpreters to interpret here, or if they will be able to do it simultaneously. So when you start your intervention, we will try to figure it out. The interpreters are here in the hall with us, so it will not be long.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. We don't want you to get hurt. Oui. Okay. عم بيقول لك لك
Fortunately, it doesn't work with a British plug. جربتي تحطي؟ هذا البلاج عندي adaptable. It doesn't. لأنه نحن بيجي البلاج هيك.
بالسويتش ما بنلعب. كده كده. كده كده صح.
Hello, good morning. I hope everyone is refreshed after the first panel. I think we had a great discussion earlier this morning, and this is a continuation of what we had discussed. And on this panel, I'm joined with wonderful colleagues and scholars from the region and also from the European Commission to discuss a bit more and delve in terms of how to better engage with local communities and what does just transition mean for local communities? How do they perceive this energy transition? And what are the impacts and what are their voices as well when it comes to this transition? Is this transition fair for everyone? Is it who represents the voices of local communities and how and what are the areas and spaces of mobilization in a region that is continuously undergoing injustices? So here I'm joined with four panelists in person, and we have 3 online. So it's going to be, we'll be on time, and we're going to give 3 to 5 minutes per panelist as a first round, and then we'll have a more second round that comes with policy recommendations. Our first speaker, Eero, I think he left, maybe he's out having a coffee, but we can maybe start then with you, Stefano, if while Eero is on his way into the venue. So Eero is an advisor at the Energy Transition and Local Governance Directorate. Eero, we are just talking about you. You're on time. Thank you. He's joining us from here, from Brussels, and he's an expert in just energy transition, and also he has worked a lot with municipalities, with mayors, and different globally, and not just in the region. So we'll start with you, Eero. We have 3 minutes for this panel, and maybe you can give us more an introduction as what does it mean for local communities working on just transition? What does it mean as well for the European Commission, who has been funding these different projects on energy? How are local communities working with you? How are they perceiving these kinds of projects? And is it a just and fair transition for all the different actors? You have 3 minutes to 5 minutes, and then as a first round, and then we'll go for another round later. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. You hear me well?
Yes.
I suppose, okay. I try to be brief, which is not my skill usually. Yes, so what is the role of local communities and particularly from a just transition perspective? So if I squeeze it into essential, so as the Commission, so we are lawmakers, all right? And that's our main job, of course, regulation, policies, and all that. And out of that, the logical follow-up is that if we develop new directives on energy transition related ones, which are part of the Green Deal, particularly, where we want to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. So it is in our interest that those pieces of law are actually relevant and implemented. And when you look at the implementation, that actually happens predominantly at the local level. So it's really the municipalities and regions. That's where more than half of all this legislation is actually implemented. So again, to make it work and make it relevant, it makes sense for us to talk to the local level, know what's going on there, what works, what doesn't work. And for this reason, a few things have been done. One, it's like more legal or formal. So we've carved out a role for municipalities and regions to be involved in national energy and climate planning. These are the big plans every member state sets to reach the Paris Agreement. That's one thing. Then there's there's really a role guaranteed for these subnationals. And then there's the bottom-up activity that we are helping, meaning initiatives such as Global Covenant of Mayors, Smart Cities Marketplace, initiatives that actually help municipalities to plan, to implement, to monitor, and finance this transition at the local level. So we go kind of top down, bottom up, and we also, are in contact. Our leaders, our commissioners who are in this building, so they have direct discussions with the mayors on energy, transport issues at local level. It's really a change of ideas, and that's something that we're doing on top of course, these government-to-government relations that, the diplomacy that everybody knows. So there's more and more this city-level activity entering there. And why? Because we just want to reach those goals of that we've set ourselves at the global level, and we know we can't do it without the cities. At the very last point, I'm really exceeding my 3 minutes. The just transition part. So one of these key tenets of this whole strategy of the Green Deal is that it has to be inclusive. The famous slogan, leave nobody behind. Yeah, it's a nice slogan, but actually it does make some sense, because if you start leaving somebody behind, i.e. people who do not understand or cannot afford the transition, so you are creating the problem, the social problems. You are creating the opposition to all these projects that need to be implemented, be it then, renewable projects, renewable energy projects or other. So you can't do that. Therefore, you have to make sure that everybody is on board. And for that, different things. Work against energy poverty, very important. Against vulnerability, funding, the so-called social climate fund has been set up there when, the transition goes ahead, and so on. We have the just transition mechanisms. We're looking at how the regions, which are, for example, in, coal-intensive regions, coal mining, what's going to happen to them when we go green? Well, we have to give them an opportunity, an option. So we're helping in this transition, those kinds of regions, very concretely in different parts of Europe first, to find ways to go to other sources of income, transform really the local community, and so on. So, but I stop here.
Great, thank you, Eero. On time, indeed. So I think jumping from you, we're going to Beirut, to Stefano Panighetti. Stefano is, I hope you're safe, in Lebanon. He's the program manager of energy and climate change at the European External Action Service. And so from Eero to Stefano, and here a question to you on the ground. away from Brussels, what are the role that the EU is actually playing when it comes to funding local initiatives? How have they gone about distributing these kinds of funding mechanisms? And what are also the main challenges that you are facing today while working in a country like Lebanon that doesn't have complete bad governance and doesn't have a government? Stefano, to you.
Yes, good morning, Sami. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, first of all, as you know, it's a bit of a difficult moment now for Lebanon. So just wanted also to express my solidarity to all the Lebanese and all the colleagues and friends. It's a bit of a tough moment, but you know, we're continuing our work here. And maybe just to give a bit of context of what the EU does here with you know, local communities and local development. So you know that we have quite a complicated context, a lot of crises in Lebanon, very weak central institution, reforms of the electricity sector that is you know, very slow. So, but at the same time, we have you know, municipalities, and a lot of work has been you know, done at the local level. So there is you know, despite all these challenges, there's a lot of powers for municipalities to act, but also very a few financial resources. So despite all these difficulties, municipalities are at the front line, you know, whether during the COVID crisis or now with, you know, some of them have hosted a large amount of refugees. So they are still, you know, need to deliver on basic public services. So our approach is twofold in Lebanon. We're supporting, of course, you know, the reform, and we have you know, policy dialogues and trying to push for this reform at the national level, because you cannot separate both. You know, there is this temptation of going, you know, just supporting municipalities, and but you know, if you don't have the national reform, it will not work. So we're working on the policy reform, and at the same time, at the local level, we have different programs. Some of them, you know, stemming from the Syrian refugee crisis, supporting municipalities. Some of them are working on more good governance. So I think this element is very important for us to make sure that whenever we work, sure, there are very short-term needs, and electricity, access to energy is definitely one. So we're providing small-scale infrastructure, especially renewable energy, you know, mostly photovoltaic panels. But at the same time, we're working on the governance. We're working on the planning, capacity building at the local level with municipality. So to enable them to somehow go from this very short time needs that they have to some more longer term planning, and giving them the tools to do so. And one way of doing this is, of course, to have you know, some sort of inclusive planning, whether with host refugee communities, all sorts of minorities, to better anchor also their legitimacy. And also the message we're always trying to pass is that with a strong planning, you're also attracting, you're better managing your resources, whether natural or you know, human resources, but at the same time, you're also improving your ability to attract financial resources, because donors want to see that at that time of longer term planning and local development. So I don't want to take too much time in this first round, but so I will not go into the details of the program, but of course we have this bilateral support, and that will still continuing. And we also have regional program. I think we'll talk maybe later on about ClimaMed, which is really supporting municipalities into this planning, so sustainable energy and climate action plan, which I think is a very good tool. So I'll stop here for just the intro part.
Great, thank you, Stefano. We will give the floor as well to the other speakers to delve more about the role of also municipalities, and we will hear from a mayor actually who's online who couldn't make it to Brussels. But so jumping and now going to Yasmin Al-Amin. She's currently pursuing her PhD at the University of College in London, and she's a researcher with us at ARI working on Tunisia. And so here, maybe Yasmina, how is this transition in the context of Tunisia? Maybe, and you can provide examples from your fieldwork. How are local communities responding to these mega projects? We've talked in the previous panel about green hydrogen. So please, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. So like Zain said, in this talk, I'm really going to try to briefly talk about the transition that's happening in Tunisia, some of the challenges, who's being left behind, and I'm going to maybe go a bit deeper on what just transition really means in countries in the Global South, since we've heard from our first speaker about really a more global North perspective. And I'm really bad with time, so please tell me when my 5 minutes are up. So I think in the first session, Daria and Mohammed really laid the scene for what's happening in the energy transition in Tunisia. So I'm not going to delve on that, but I just wanted to say maybe one point about how it's viewed from a sort of justice perspective when it comes to maybe the political scene, which has, somehow unlocked the transition. So now we're seeing that there are projects that are coming through, but it's actually, when you look at it from an energy democracy perspective, I think it's kind of worrying. So I think what we might see right now is like really a top-down approach to the energy transition in Tunisia, with very little local participation and even very little national ownership. Because I think right now, by the way, a lot of what I'm saying right now has come from the fieldwork that I've done, and it's with talking with a lot of CSOs that are really on the ground. So this is not like, this is what I've heard from them. So I'm sort of, bringing this message. So it's really concerning the trajectory of the transition, specifically about this very focused export perspective. I know that in the first session, there was a different perspective about it, but I'm bringing a sort of a new perspective about this. As we all know, Tunisia depends a lot on imports, whether in energy or in food. So I think that what's happening right now, this really focus on renewables, green hydrogen, with a largely export dimension, raises serious questions about really who benefits from this transition, who bears the cost, and so these were just many points to start with. Also, I wanted to comment on the fact that a lot of these projects are meant to be happening in the South. I think we all know, I think it was mentioned also in the first panel that the South is really one of the most underdeveloped regions of Tunisia, with a lot of social marginalization. Tunisia also, I think this was already mentioned, but the water scarcity issue is really big on, CSOs are really worried about this water scarcity issue. And for it to be met with desalinization is not, does not seem like the ideal path right now, because it creates a lot of competition with existing water needs. It creates competition with food needs, with agriculture. So I think CSOs are really talking about this need to have this water, energy, food nexus approach when it comes to any energy project. And then a lot of my work has been to ask CSOs what does just transition mean to them. So I think there's a lot of definitions for just transition, and there's different perspectives. And as we've all said, like there's different actors, but just transition in the Global South has often been framed from a climate justice perspective. And there's this very strong perspective that talks about historical imbalances and historical responsibilities between Global North and Global South. I think maybe Ahmed spoke a bit about this, but on a micro scale, but I think even on a macro scale, talking about just transition is a lot of systemic change. It's about moving away from extractivism towards more equitable models of production and consumption. And I think there's a lot to think about, even when we're talking about CBAM from a justice perspective. How much responsibility can countries from the Global South bear when it comes to decarbonization, when they were not given the right to develop and to emit. I think this question of common but differentiated responsibilities is really what CSOs are thinking about right now in Tunisia. And I'm sorry, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I wanted to say that for them, they've been talking a lot about energy sovereignty. They've been talking about energy democracy. They've been talking about more decentralized projects where there's actually a decent job creation and real job creation. I mean, everything related to green hydrogen, there's a lot of concern about what kind of jobs are going to be created, what technology will be transferred, how will they be able to access this technology. I mean, I know you've talked about nearshoring and friendshoring, but when it comes to hydrogen, which is quite complex, will there be actual transfer of technology? I think these were some of the concerns that they've been raising. And with the political situation right now in Tunisia, you all know how difficult it is to have these spaces for dialogue. I think what they've said to me is that there are some sort of dialogues that are happening, but that not all CSOs are being included, that there's a bit of cherry picking that's happening. Anyone that is opposed to certain technologies is not always being included. And one last thing, maybe just to highlight that some of the CSOs are actually doing interesting work of going and speaking to communities directly, of getting their interests, of finding what their perceptions are about these mega projects, even about green hydrogen, and sort of building this scene or building this ground for having actual imaginaries about what would it mean to have this transition and what direction do they want. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. And I think this is one main thing that is happening, that is missing. I'm sorry, that this talk about what do people actually want, not, and I think also Mohammed mentioned this in the first session, not just what the government of Tunisia want, but what do the people want? Because at the end, this land issue is very critical. South of Tunisia has been marginalized right now. What it seems like is that lands might be taken from them and they don't know what is really coming back to them. So I think there's a need to question these models that are being proposed right now. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmina, for this. I think you've raised several points on common but differentiated responsibilities, land grabbing, and I think Monica, one of the speakers, will be discussing about these. I'd like to jump to Muzna Al-Masri on my right here. Muzna is an anthropologist, and she's also a scholar, now living in the UK. And she co-founded an institute or an EBLA initiative and collective. So maybe Muzna, you can share with us some of the examples working with local communities, but specifically marginalized communities, and at the same time, how are they mobilizing inside a building based on the last publication that you've just published?
Thank you. And thanks everyone for having me. To start with, I want to say that the lens we've approached, like I and the groups, the teams I belong to, approach the issue of energy is from an energy justice perspective. So to follow up on what Yasmina was saying, not an energy transition issue. And when we say energy justice, that brings in issues of access, safety, sovereignty, even if the pathway to achieving this justice is transition, but it's not just about transition. To give you a few examples of what distinction allows us, like concerns we've seen was in refugee camps, the lack of safety in wiring that kills young kids because they're electrocuted because of an infrastructure that's not safe. The anxiety of having to juggle poor energy supply and cater for work or domestic needs without that energy supply. Or even like more blatantly, the fact that an issue of like cutting electricity off of 2 million people in Gaza as a war tactic is an energy justice issue. It's not a transition issue. So for taking it from the concerns of the region, I think we need to reframe a little bit the discussion if it's not seen from a European perspective only. For now, I'll share key points of relevance for engagement based on 3 research projects that I was involved in the past 4 or 5 years. And I say them because all 3 are from an urban setting, which I think is key and more difficult in Lebanon today. And because they encompass like different, the upper class, middle class, and kind of slums and refugee camps. One is recent research on how residents of Beirut collectively manage at the building level electricity supply to cater for shared services and supplement the meager supply from EDL. Another is a citizen assembly that we convened in Beirut in 2020, which allowed us some space for discussion of citizens' visions or imaginary of what a just energy future looks like. So we'll attempt to answer what people want, that Salim asked. And the third is research on the governance of water and electricity infrastructure in one Palestinian refugee camp, though now it's about 50% Syrian refugees too, in one suburb of Beirut. So all urban contexts with their complexity. Key takeaways from that: one is that people do invest a significant effort in collaboration and finding collective solutions. Whether in the camp, we traced in the camp 7 years of trying to find collective solutions, of initiatives with different actors that are like persistent, resilient, I'd say, in a very conflict-ridden and complex context. They invest weekly in buildings, people invest weekly hours trying to find solutions. So this is something I think we should capitalize on. Second, this is a huge burden on residents. So we're talking about the burden of electricity cuts, but then there is the added burden of like the challenges of having to manage these services at the household, workplace, building, village level, but otherwise should be provided by the state. And the problem is that these residents, they're trying to find these solutions in an unpredictable, like they don't have the luxury of strategic planning, the luxury of research, the luxury of technical expertise, and makes it extra difficult for them. So the inability to resolve these problems is not a problem of inability to collaborate, but rather they're facing a really difficult task. The impact, the third issue is that the impact of failure in energy systems actually exacerbates existing vulnerabilities. So we know it already, you've all mentioned it, but like people with lower income, disability, health needs, women, all feel the brunt of energy cuts, but they also, the access to solutions is further limited. And despite this boom in energy that was discussed, or explosion, as and besides financial considerations, the solar demand in urban areas is significantly lower because of limited roof space and the need to find governance solutions. So there might be solutions, but it has to bring in the local church or community institution with the buildings. It needs to bring in lower and higher income buildings. In addition, with these difficulties, there is the need to deal with the forces on the ground, or like strong armed racketeering groups in refugee camps. Some of the generator owners that have that power, the reality of a militarized or one that feeds from clientelistic networks higher up, not blaming it on the generator. So those who set the prices, who set the law, have connections at a higher level. So in foregrounding the people's perspective, what vision emerges? What do the people want? What we heard from people was, of course, it bears repeating that the energy issue is not a technical one, it's a social, political one. And mostly the framing of it as technical is one that the authorities readily adopt because it allows them to exclude the popular opinion. When we held the first citizen assembly, we heard that the discourse from all the officials we invited, oh, this is a technical issue, the people shouldn't be involved in it, or it's they wouldn't know about it. But if we take what the people want seriously, there is this kind of oscillation between a desire for state regulation. They want to relieve that burden of everyday management. They don't want to be bearing it by necessity. But at the same time, they want to free themselves from that bureaucratic, non-functioning mechanism. But in all cases, there isn't a desire for a private sector-led initiative. When they go to scenarios that they want, it's community-led, it's cooperative. that brings in different actors, that incorporates the private sector, but is not led by the private sector. And so whereas we have some success in rural areas with municipalities taking on that role, in urban areas, especially Beirut, it's much more difficult because the municipality is much bigger, the challenges are bigger, and the reality of some of the municipalities in urban areas makes it extra difficult also, particularly Beirut. So when we move on, I'm assuming my time's ended, you're looking at me. Yeah, but when we move on to what our vision of what comes forward, I think that's the thing that I'd like to elaborate on. How do we make possible something that is collective, community-owned, not in the spirit of entrepreneurship in that sense, which is a buzzword, but maybe in a more classic, and Europe has something to teach us about cooperative energy solutions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Muzna. I think you brought back again. Yeah, energy sovereignty at the forefront, but also the challenges that refugees community are facing. Also, your role as citizen assembly. How do you bring together different people and actually convey their messages to policymakers and others? So jumping from there, Monica, I will give you the floor. Monica Carrion is our partner at the Moroccan Institute for Policy Analysis. She's also Karim's colleague. And I think the question that was addressed earlier in the panel about land grabbing, about local communities in the context of Morocco, and also the fieldwork that you have done and the different consultative meetings that have taken place in the last 2 years. Maybe you can share with us some of these concerns in the context of Morocco. Monica.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting today. Yeah, I'm the Moroccan Institute for Policy Analysis is managing the Just Transition Green Bridge project in Morocco. So during the first year, we were holding some consultations with civil society in Morocco. We met around 101 associations and NGOs from all around Morocco. I think that from 10 regions out of 12, from the north to the south of the country. The objective of the meetings were to gather their perspectives and priorities on the main challenges in the 3 axes of the project, which are energy transition and water scarcity and food sovereignty. And the idea was just to gather how they perceive the problems, how they perceive the solutions, including them. And also the idea is just of those consultations is just that were a first step to engage them in a decision making at the local and the national level. So the first question in all the meetings were, what do you understand about just environmental transition? And honestly, they didn't understand very well the concept. The idea was most linked to which is green energy, to shift to green energy, but they didn't understand exactly the concept of what is energy transition or what is environmental transition. So that was very interesting. And also energy for those civil society organizations, the main priority was always the water. The debate on the energy or the debate on the food sovereignty was not that hot, but let's say that the water is always was an axis in all the meetings, and the main concern for those civil society organizations. But we collected around, I don't know, a lot of more than up to 40 recommendations. But let's talk about the main problems that they perceive. First of all, they don't see that all those big plans of the Moroccan state are connected to the civil society. They seem themselves completely disconnected from the state, especially in the more marginalized areas, especially in the south and in the north of Morocco. So they don't see that. I mean, they don't see the connection between those plans and their daily life and how they can affect them for good or for bad. Also, a main concern is the access to information, and this is a problem in Morocco and a main concern in the civil society, in spite of all the projects working on that. And the access of information is a main issue because sometimes civil society opens a fake debate on some problems because of that, because there is no transparency and they cannot get the data. So from that point, they start a very interesting fake debate about many things. For example, in the case of Ouarzazate, the question of the use of water in the plant, it was like a main issue or a main debate for all those organizations, but really it was not like the problem is not that big in that sense, because I mean, I think that we were talking about that, Karim and me, and I think that they consume like 1% of water or something like this, and there are other projects, for example, the mines that in Dimer that are consuming more water than this Nur station. So the lack of information or the problems to access to information is a main issue. Also, we can highlight other problems like a lack of awareness in terms of what is, I mean, how they can help, or how the communities are affected by the problem, or how they can be part of the solution. So there is a lack of awareness about all those things, and there is also a lack of coordination between all the stakeholders. I mean, this is also a main complaint, how there is no coordination between local authorities, national authorities, public bodies, civil society, and you can see like a lot of efforts, but the results are not that to the level because there is a huge lack of coordination, and the civil society perceive that as a problem. Also, there is like, of course, a lack of knowledge, technical knowledge and knowledge in general, and also a problem. They consider that all those huge projects or medium projects, they don't have into account the local idiosyncrasia and the local problems, and of course they cannot in the design of the projects, the requests of the needs of those communities are not taken into account. So this is why they are not part of the projects from the beginning of the process. So this is what can I say? Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. I think we will come back to different recommendations. But now I'd like to give the floor to Fawzi Kalash, who's online. He's also a mayor. He's a dentist by profession, but he's a mayor from Beshmezin. It's a small village in Lebanon, in the north of Lebanon, and I hope you are safe. Fawzi.
Hi.
Hello, hi.
Good morning. I am so sorry not being with you due to the situation in Lebanon, especially these days. We have many people are moving from south to north, and we should be on duty. Bishmezin is a small village in بشمال لبنان. مساحتها 544 هكتار. بتبعد عن بيروت 75 كيلومتر. من 2013 أنا رئيس بلدية مع مجلس بلدي من 12 عضو. كان شعارنا نحن بالبلدية أول ما كان المجلس البلدي هو بشمزين كلين أند جرين، وهيك بلشنا بمشروع فرز النفايات من المصدر اللي النفايات لإعادة التدوير، وكان هذا أول المشاريع اللي انطلقنا فيه. وكان أول مشروع كمان ننطلق فيه نحن بالنسبة للطاقة المتجددة. يعني المعمل هيدا بيشتغل على الطاقة المتجددة من أول ما انعمل المعمل بال2014. قبل نحن كان عندنا النظرة كمجلس بلدي مشان ننتقل للطاقة المتجددة، وهيدا كان إنه البلدية اشتريت المولدات اللي هن كانوا للقطاع الخاص تقدر تسيطر على موضوع التسعيرة وتسيطر على التوزيع العادل للناس. من بعدها كان المشروع الثاني اللي انطلقنا فيه هو كنا متأملين، وهيك وعدتنا الدولة اللبنانية وقتها انه بال2015 حيكون عندنا كهرباء 24 على 24، فتوجهنا وغيرنا كل المصابيح على الطريق العام لليد لنوفر بالكلفة على البلدية. للأسف صرنا بال2024 وما عندنا أكثر من 4 ساعات كهرباء. فتوجهنا كان عندنا عدة لقاءات مع أهالي الضيعة تنعرفهم على الطاقة المتجددة والطاقة البديلة، وكان أهم شيء نحن كنا عندنا مشروع مع الEU إنه مشان قدامنا وقتها بس ما قدرنا أخذنا الفانس لكل بيت نقدر نعطيه 15 أمبير طاقة متجددة. فبلشنا ستيب باي ستيب. نحن كان في توجيه لكل الناس انه ننتقل للطاقة المتجددة لنوفر عليهم ونكون في كهرباء متواصلة. كان المشروع الثاني اللي نحن عملناه كان هو المشروع الطاقة غير المعمل المعمل لنا فرز النفايات، كان ممول من الUK بواسطة الميرسي كور جزء منه، والجزء الثاني من الUSAID. كان على مرحلتين الطاقة اللي تركب على المشروع هيدا. رجعنا عملنا المشروع الثاني كان مع الUSAID كمان، كان هو هدف منه نحن عندنا مدرسة ببشمزين فيها 1500 تلميذ من كل الكورة. الهدف انه نخفف نحن كلفة كهرباء ومولدات على المدرسة اللي كان عندها مولد خاص، مقابل انه المدرسة تخصم من الاقساط المدرسية للتلاميذ. وهيك مع الUSAID عملنا مشروع قدمنا جزء طاقة وجزء منه كمان للمدرسة وجزء منه للإنارة المحلية، إنارة الشبكة العامة. بعد منه بلشنا نتطور شوي شوي وشاركنا المجتمع المدني ببشمزين. عملنا كتير لجان من أهالي بشمزين، من الشباب والصبايا ببشمزين. كل لجنة كان لها اختصاص. توصلنا عملنا لجنة اختصاصها تنفيذ مشاريع الطاقة والإشراف عليها واستدامتها. كان أهم شيء نحن المشاريع اللي نعملها يكون فيها لها استدامة. فعملنا مشروع كمان تحلية المياه تصير صالحة للشرب، بشمزين فيها كتير ينابيع مي مشان يقدروا يستفيدوا أهالي الضيعة. كمان عملنا كان المشروع يدار على الطاقة المتجددة، وهذا المشروع وفر كتير على كلفة على الناس للمي لشرية المي. يعني تقريبا 3/4 الكلفة استفادوا منها كل أهالي المنطقة. وهذا كمان على الطاقة المتجددة المشروع الترمبات وكل يشتغل على الطاقة المتجددة. هذا كان من السيدرز جمعية محلية. ورجعنا كمان كيفينا بالمشاريع لوصلنا لمشروعنا الأهم اللي هو نحن عم نعمله كمان بمساعدة من الUSAID، بس التمويل من المغتربين. يعني عملنا لجنة تتواصل مع المغتربين وعملنا مشروع سميناه مشروع مارجرجيس. مارجرجيس اللي هو الهدف منه بإنارة الكنيسة، إنارة الجامع، إنارة مبنى البلدية، يلي كان جزء منه مبنى البلدية كان الإنارة تبعه بمشروع من اليو ان دي بي كمان تركبنا طاقة بديلة على مبنى البلدية وزدناها بالمشروع الثاني اللي سميناه مشروع مارجريس. الهدف من مشروع مارجريس انه الكنيسة والجامع والمبنى البلدي وكل الاماكن العامة تكون على الطاقة بالنهار، والمشروع نحن مكفي يصير إنارة باقي شوارع الضيعة كمان على الطاقة المتجددة. هذا المشروع مثل سبق وقلت هذا ممول من المغتربين من أهالي بشمزين. قدرنا حققنا فيز 1 وفيز 2. فيز 3 هلا نحن يلي هو انه نقدر نضوي الشوارع بالليل عم نتحضر له وان شاء الله نقدر نكفيه باسرع وقت. والهدف من كل هيدي المشاريع كنا قلنا التوفير، والتوفير وتكون الجو بشمزين نظيف وعلى الطاقة. نحن بالمبدأ أول ما أخذنا المولدات كنا ندور مولدات 700 كفاءة. حاليا وصلنا بالمشروع اللي عملناه نحن الضيعة بس عم ندور مولدات 200 كفاءة، يعني قدرنا وفرنا 500 كفاءة على أمل أنه نقدر تصير بشمزين كلها على الطاقة بالنهار، ونقدر نأمن يعني عندنا بالمشروع هذا اللي عندنا نقطتين حساسين نحن لازم بشمزين بدي اقول في ناس تقريبا 70% من البيوت ركبوا طاقه بديله، هي اللي مقتدر قدر ركب. عندنا المشكله نحن الثانيه اللي هي نحن يلي مش مقتدر واللي هو هذا التارجت تبعنا والهدف تبعنا نقدر نأمن له طاقه بديله وطاقه رخيصه بالظروف الاقتصاديه الصعبه يلي نحن فيها. هذا مشروعنا الأساسي، هذا همنا نحن نقدر نأمن نوفر على الناس الكهرباء. قدرنا أمنا لهم مي بمشروع كمان على الطاقة البديلة من اليونيسف مع الاف اي دي. كمان هيدا في عنا بير مي بيقدر بيعطينا 5 ساعات كهرباء تنقدر نأمن مي لبشمزين. عنا 2 بيرين مي كمان عملنا حضرنا الدراسات تبعونهم مشان نقدر نستفيد، وهيك ان شاء الله نقدر نأمن 24 ساعة كهرباء و24 ساعة مي لأهالي بشمزين.
شكرا.
شكرا.
شكرا لك استاذ فوزي، يعطيك العافيه، وان شاء الله كمان قاعد بشمزين وعم تهتم بالوضع اللي نحن عم نقطع فيه. I'll jump to the last speaker, also our partner from the American University in Cairo, Soha Abdelati. She's the Deputy Director of the Alternative Policy Solutions, and they have recently published a paper on energy transition. And also, what does it mean in the context of Egypt today, specifically also with the war in Gaza? It is affecting the energy systems. What do local communities have shared with you, given that you have also done some field work? Soha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean. I'm hoping everybody can see me and hear me, right? I'll go ahead and get started. So I think with the introduction that Serene has already given, I think that my presentation is going to try to tie in what's been happening in the region with some of the key problems that our stakeholders and the people we've worked with have outlined, and the problems that seem to be defining the energy transition here in Egypt. So in the energy transition in Egypt, like many countries across the world, is highly interlinked and dependent on regional and global circumstances. So while the war in Ukraine was presented as an opportunity for the Egyptian government to boost its gas exports, the government was also quick to say that the war in Gaza was one of the main reasons why why Egypt witnessed major blackouts over the last year. However, the truth is that it even before the war on Gaza, Egypt has been witnessing major blackouts, with certain regions being affected more than others. calling into question the accessibility of even traditional uses of energy for everyone, really. So this sort of leads me to outlining what this regional context says about the energy transition. And I think that there are 5 key features. One, which is very obvious here, is that it's the energy transition is vulnerable to external shocks. It's not being adequately planned to accommodate these changes, and then that more needs to be done to ensure that this transition answers first and foremost to its people, but also that it's based on building local knowledge and expertise. The second feature, or this second key element here, is that the transition seems to be driven largely by Egypt's plan and ambitions to become a regional hub. Most of the funding and projects are large scale, with no clear plans, or at least no one has access to these plans or ideas of making renewable energy more accessible for individuals. Number 3, energy efficiency and energy reforms seem to be are being used as excuses to reduce local consumption. But in truth, it's being this is slightly more this is slightly misguided, because what we're seeing here is that the ones that are really being impacted are the ones who actually are not large consumers of energy, but they are the ones being affected the most, which leads me to my 4th point, which is the transition is already impacting the more vulnerable, even though even though it's still in its early stages, but we already see that the impact it has on the more vulnerable. The energy reform that Egypt has been undergoing since 2016, as a result of the elimination of energy subsidy, has been responsible for around 40% of inflation, for example. Additionally, when we speak about just energy transition, and when we speak about ensuring that we can secure good quality green jobs, this is questionable, given that quality of employment in Egypt is deteriorating. It's been deteriorating since 2012, and it's only gotten worse in the past few years. Most workers don't have access to social insurance, to contracts, to minimum wage, and so on. And then I think lastly, which is key, but also overarching everything else that we've been talking about here, is that there seems to be no local involvement whatsoever. So these plans are being designed at the top. We hear about them as government announcements. Real involvement from whether it's the communities or civil societies working on the ground is non-existent almost. And that's it.
Thank you, Saha. We'll have another round. We'll follow the same order to give a key policy recommendation, since we're sitting in this building, that we can address vis-à-vis the European Union on both sides of the Mediterranean. And a lot of the speakers have already raised, moving away from just transition towards more energy sovereignty, towards energy justice, and defining these terms that we own and we possess. So we'll give you the floor, Iro. We'll start with you, and then we go back to Stefano in Beirut.
Thank you. Well, there would be so many things to say. Actually, there's been great sort of reality descriptions here about the situation, and it's obvious that there are big differences between the south and north in this case. So, where can I start? One point maybe in a bit of a random order. There are some really interesting projects or measures that have been taken at the municipal level in Morocco, in in Tunisia, in different Lebanon and so on, under these EU-funded projects that or initiatives that I mentioned, like Covenant of Mayors. There is, just citing here, one which is in Chefchaouen in Morocco. The mayor, Mohamed Sefiani, a good friend, he's been driving very interesting local participation programs, bringing the local community on board and gone for reducing energy consumption, obviously showing it in the city, in the municipality, because that's the thing also here. So usually the public sector shows example to the private and creates demand actually for new things. So he's been working there on buildings, on the transport and the public lighting, which was the very good example the mayor from Lebanon mentioned. That's one of the examples all over the place, including Europe, which has a very fast payoff rate. It pays back very quickly. If you have, say you have old-fashioned lighting system, you turn them into LED, you get your money back very quickly. Of course, there are issues when you have a lot of power cuts, so that's another story. Anyway, so there are some really good local projects. I mentioned the Moroccan example. Also, there was part of that was skill development. So there was a training of local people into, you know, how to learn about how to be part of this transition locally. So that was one good example. There are other ones just from Lebanon, from a town down there where the mayor managed to sort of bring together, and I'm just checking here, I don't know how to pronounce this, Elias, yeah, okay. And that started with setting up this kind of a sustainable energy action plan, again, with the help of these EU projects, and focus on consumption, on shift to renewable. So you have to really cut consumption first and then go for the renewable. That's the way it makes sense. And there, the municipality, they partnered with a local supplier, in this case of solar panels, and they managed to make a deal where they would buy, you know, basically a container of solar panels. They install those in 40 homes with minimal, you know, markups on this, call it the deal. And you got this thing going. Now they have more than half of the houses are solar powered. And the point was that this was not coming from the municipality budget, the money. It was looking for a business partner who would agree to start this way. And then you get the volumes going and you got into it. And the involvement of the local municipality and all the citizens was really important part of it. It worked there. I understand it's going to be different in Beirut and so on. In any case, so I could go on. I mean, there are many examples of this, but I think the super important point is this sharing of information, which I understand is quite non-existing in many of the examples we heard today. I mean, has to go there because otherwise, obviously, there is no just transition. It has to be the involvement of the local community. That's the only thing that makes sense if you want to have a good end result. And also create the jobs there. If we talk about hydrogen, yes, there are projects to bring hydrogen through pipes to Europe. Some of them certainly will also turn into reality. There are those pipes which are thought about bringing from the Nordic countries to Germany, for example. And the discussion is, well, we don't want to put raw hydrogen into a pipe for many, many reasons. And we have to turn it into something, ammonia or whatever. You improve create more value before you sell it over. I think that would make a lot more sense for, you know, Nordic countries. I think it will make sense for southern countries as well. The situation is the same. You know, that would be this. And then last point, this collectivity, how to bring the collective action on board. The examples we've seen in Europe and also outside are these energy communities, local energy communities or renewable energy communities, something we put in law. These are spreading in Europe, where you have indeed citizens assemblies, you know, we have sometimes companies involved, sometimes the municipalities involved, but not always. They get together, often build renewable energy for local purposes. And that's great for those people who live in that area because they actually get usually a lower price. There's no commercial, you know, margins on it. And this has been involving the people locally, learning about what energy means. It's about the efficiency, it's about the, you know, many things, and job creation. So that is a very strong driver of the transition and the inclusiveness of it. So I would, of course, hope that this could be done elsewhere. And there are some examples, but I know it's not maybe the natural thing. But of course, the government, central government's openness to share, that would be the kind of a really a key driver on this if we want good results. Thank you.
Thank you, Iro. You've mentioned several points. I think the mayor also raised this issue as well as Muzna and other speakers. I'd like to give the floor to Stefano, if you're still with us, and to follow up on what, you know, the collective actions and how is it on the ground, since you are working a lot with municipalities and civil society actors. Stefano?
Yes, no, I think there were a lot of very interesting things that were said and that I can agree with. And I think certainly the question of the energy sovereignty is very important in Lebanon. And, you know, you can look at it first from that point of view, that a lot of people just want to have electricity, and it's very difficult, very expensive. You know, the national provider doesn't provide more than 3 to 4 hours. So there's a massive use of very polluting diesel, and generators, very expensive. So this is creating a lot of, you know, disparity. So in that sense, renewable energy, photovoltaic panels, it really makes sense. And this is what we've seen booming in Lebanon. So, you know, it's really, the two issues are very interlinked. Now, the issue that we've seen is also a very much chaotic development of photovoltaic panels. It's mostly, you know, private sector or households led, and because the whole network is not energized, there's a lot of losses. So from that situation, we can also see at the local level a lot of opportunities for better cooperation, for community-led initiatives to try to link, you know, this different energy or renewable energy production. There's been some mini-grid attempts, so there's always the question of the legality. And in Lebanon, we have this new distributed renewable energy law, and we're looking into that to see, you know, try always to link the national and the local level and see from that new law that's not yet, you know, fully implemented, but is there any opportunities to further develop local opportunities? And we've had pilot projects in the past, and they are very interesting example. But then again, you need some sort of planning. So I like the community-led initiative if they can be anchored into you know, some sort of municipal planning and something that's very participatory. And we've seen that in certain municipalities, not necessarily around energy, more around, you know, local economic development, livelihoods. But that, I think it's very encouraging when we have that kind of planning, plus the community involvement part. And then there is really a space for everyone, including also, I think that's another takeaway for me, it's the private sector, you know, participation in this project. And I very much agree that it has to be led not by the private sector, but really by the municipality, by the communities. But then there's a role that the private sector can play well when they are, you know, clearly well directed. So I think yes, I think this is my main takeaways. The planning is very important to attract also the financing. When it's really community led, it's really it's proven to be very efficient. But again, in Lebanon, I think we need also more and more sharing information, because they're very interesting initiatives, but somehow it's not necessarily well shared. There's always this kind of prejudice that always happening in that region, despite the fact that other municipalities face the same challenges. They have a bit sometimes difficulties to share those experiences. So I think this is what we're trying also to do, to share these good initiatives. So this cooperation, and also more, we have those regional programs. So certainly there are also other examples in other countries that could be applicable. But yes, I would say that the planning is important, and in that planning, there's a lot of space for community involvement.
Thank you so much, Stefano. I mean, and here jumping to Tunisia with Yasmina, about community-led also initiatives. Is this some of the recommendations that you can provide us? Is this feasible in the context of Tunisia, and what have you seen while interacting and engaging with civil society actors? It is an assembly.
Sure. Okay, there's many things, but maybe I can start by talking about this point of energy efficiency that I think has been brought up. I think it's very important when we're talking about countries like Lebanon and to some extent also Tunisia. Like, I think it's very important to focus on energy efficiency, but when we're looking at it from a climate perspective, and when we're saying how much does Tunisia actually contribute to global GHG emissions, and actually Lebanon, it's very funny, it's the same number, like 0.007% of global emissions. I think the focus has to be redirected in this perspective, specifically in Lebanon, where there's deep energy poverty. We have to sort of think of the link between efficiency, but also we have to think about energy poverty. We have to think about what comes with development. Often development does come with a sort of higher consumption, although I know we're trying to decouple this through efficiency. I do agree about that, but we can't overlook the fact that even access to jobs means that you have to have, for example, a laptop, you have to be able to charge your phone. So I think it's just important to highlight this. I wanted to also talk about maybe not specifically from Tunisia, because I don't think that there's been a just transition, but maybe from experiences from South Africa, about how can engagement actually happen. I think that everyone has mentioned how important engagement is and being inclusive, but I think we need to just make sure that it's actually meaningful engagement and actual dialogue, not a sort of checklist that, okay, we've spoken to these communities. We need to actually hear these communities and give them ownership so that they feel that they've actually been consulted, that it wasn't just, they were informed. Because at the end of the day, there needs to be a sort of acceptability of whatever technology that is going to be introduced. And this links also to sort of doing this assessment of what is the interest of the population? What do they really want? Is this the direction that they want for the transition? And just one last thing, I think Hamad talked about this before, but having sort of very clear conditions about what type of technology transfer will happen, what types of jobs will be created. I mean, I always read numbers like, okay, 12,000, 30,000 jobs will be created. But then when we look at it more clearly, we see that, okay, it's like a security guard, it's a person who will clean the panels. I think focusing on decent jobs and making sure that there's the right type of training and that there's clear conditions that will make sure that jobs will be created and that they will be sustainable, that will not be just for the construction period, for example, or that it will really have trickle-down effects on the economies and on local development. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmina. I think the South Africa example is good to go outside of our regions and think of how is engagement and how inclusive is these kinds of engagement. So back to you, Muzna.
Yeah. Okay. I have to, it's like another invitation for reframing. is in terms of how we think of energy. I would say, because we had this comment before on energy, is it a commodity? Is it a service? I would like to reframe it as a common, in the sense that it's a public good. It's a masha'a in Arabic. And I take this from, again, an example from Gaza, a young boy going to charge their phone in this place where solar energy allows for lots of people to come and charge their supplies. And he says, I've come to this electricity sabil, which is the kind of water fountain that is part of this like historic tradition of providing water to everyone. So to think of energy as a common, as its provision as a sabil. In that reframing, then we reconsider how do we think, what mechanisms exist to sort of foreground people's perspective, to have their imaginary at the center of it. And I think when we think of planning, we need to think of citizens as a pillar that is as equal to policymakers and the technical experts in the private sector. Not moving to meaningful engagement. It's actually saying, we're not consulting them at the beginning and then we continue. It's more kind of have it as at the center of our thinking, especially in contexts in the region where there is a deficiency in democracy. So it's ideally, we would have liked the municipality alone or our elected MP to do that. But when there is that deficiency, we need more direct participation from the people, unfortunately. And in that sense, I think because the issue is new, we don't have civil society in that sense to complement that. There is expert on this. We need, in at least a transitional period, until that kind of civil society that is expert and that has developed further, more involvement of the people in different ways. So that's why we experimented with the citizen assembly. It's not an ideal, it's very difficult. We plan to organize 2 citizen assemblies now. One was supposed to be in Lebanon, the other in Tunisia, and I will not kind of depress you with the difficulties with that. The other issue is the focus on governance. So if we're saying it's not a technical issue, it's a political and social one, then the issue of governance comes at different levels. At the community level, in terms of supporting examples like the community energy project, and particularly urban areas. Also focus not only on the private sector, but these collective ones, the differentiation between the urban and rural, but also mechanisms to ensure in our bilateral funding that there is proper do no harm analysis, proper analysis of how any funding that's given is feeding clientelistic networks and feeding the kind of greater political power of existing actors. Also, maybe broader supportive ecosystems. So it's not just a decision, like there is knowledge, there's technical expertise that we need to feed in, but without the power of that. So quality control for solar panels and inverter batteries, issues of waste management for spend, legal protection for customs, even ecosystem beyond transitions, like in the buildings, when our project, there is a desire to collectively work, but the building law, the law for like residents of buildings, is not up to date. It's the last changed in the 80s, and it doesn't provide residents with a way to govern the building collectively. So there are spaces, gray spaces around energy that we need to be looking at. So maybe that's for the legal. And just to take into consideration with that in the region, because we speak about of North Africa and that kind of relationship. We have the Gulf is one area, but then we have, besides Lebanon, what is not present is all the kind of conflict context we're in. Us, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and the context we're in now. I don't have answers to this, but I think we need to be thinking a little bit of what happens if the things escalate, the whole discussion of conflict and post-conflict kind of reconstruction of infrastructure that never recovered. We haven't touched on that, but I feel it's like it's something we need to be thinking of with a view of engagement and inclusion.
Thank you, Mosna. And yes, conflict is definitely, I mean, some of these solar panels have been destroyed. And
I have to say that I was seeing the news yesterday and seeing all these rooftops. We were looking at this imagery of rooftops in Lebanon full of solar panels. And yesterday, in the images of destruction, the same like space is rooftops of collapsing solar panels with.
But yeah, exactly. Not just in Lebanon, it's, as well in Gaza and Palestine. Yeah. So we'll go back to you, Monica. And here, yes, I mean, we've discussed many, you've already touched upon specific recommendations, but more specifically about the locations. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we can go. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so in those consultations, we got like more than 60 recommendations. Something very interesting that I forgot to tell you about civil society in Morocco and how they are like fighting for which is related to climate change is the ethnical component. Most of the there is a big difference between in civil society. There is a big difference between which is like NGOs and associations, and also which is like only. I mean, activism. We have been talking about that today. So most of the movements, especially in the southeast of Morocco, are related to the component Amazigh, which is we're like really fighting for water and also for spaces in the south of Morocco. So this is something that's very interesting that was like we saw in the meetings, and that we are like all the time checking in those meetings and all these conversations with these associations or civil society in general. So yes, to summarize some of those recommendations. First of all, we have to empower CSOs and local communities, including them in policy development, as well as in the implementation and monitoring of the execution of the new policies. Also, we have to involve local communities in the whole life cycle of the projects and put those communities in the core of the sustainability of those projects. You were talking about how some projects involve those local communities at the beginning or in the inception phase of the project, but after that they disappear from the actions or from the projects. So it's really important to have them or include them, because I think that they are part of the sustainability of the projects. To have like in Morocco, like projects with a calendar of 30 years, 40 years. So it's not an idea. I think it's not a good idea just to consider them just in the beginning or in the launching of the projects. Also to ensure citizens have access to information for transparent and accountable governance. This is very important, the access to information. We have been talking about that before. In terms of which is knowledge, risk and awareness, research, it's important to invest or to promote knowledge and awareness at many levels. Not only at in terms, for example, of awareness, it's not only very important to work with civil society, but also from the schools. But also it's very important to work with the civil servants and authorities, especially the local authorities. Also, a recommendation is to promote technical innovation in all which is related to workforce Jamila was highlighting the same because we were like talking about that also in the consultations. What kind of jobs do the projects offer to the local communities? Of course, there is a lack of knowledge, or there is a lack of technical knowledge. So let's start from those technical trainings or whatever in order to have a skilled civil local community able to be involved in those jobs, not only in the which is like cleaning or security jobs. So this is really important also. In all which is like related to governance and legal frameworks, to strengthen policy and governance, to establish solid legal frameworks, and to foster cross-sectional collaboration to address the challenges related to energy, food, and water, which are the axis of the projects. It's okay, no?
Yeah, we can. No, it's very good actually. فوزي رح نعطي مجال لك بس أقل من دقيقة. أستاذ فوزي تفضل. عم نعطي توصيات رغم يعني الظروف اللي كمان عم تقطعوا فيها ببشمزين عن مواضيع لهم علاقة بالتمويل، ويعني كمان الحرب موجودة حاليا. يمكن إذا فيك تعطي هيك أقل من دقيقة لو سمحت. تفضل.
نحن بالاساس الهم الاكبر اللي عندنا هو اللامركزيه الاداريه بموضوع الكهرباء وموضوع المي لنوفر كثير على الناس. اللامركزيه الاداريه نحن نقدر نحققها بس اذا كان في عندنا دعم خارجي، لانه نحن استنفدنا كل الدعم الداخلي من المغتربين واهالي الضيعه. يعني نحن بحاجه انا مثل ما قلت 24 ساعه كهرباء و24 ساعة مي لنوزع على الناس. وبيهمني بكل الموضوع هو التوزيع العادل، وخصوصا للطبقات الفقيرة يلي هي مش قادرة توصل للطاقة المتجددة بكلفة صفر. إذا نحن قادرين نأمن لهم هيدا بمساعدات خارجية، ونحن بنتمنى يكون نقدر نحصل على هالشيء، تكون بشمزين مثل ما هي هلا بايلوت بروجكت بالويست مانجمنت، تكون بايلوت بروجكت باللامركزيه الاداريه، ونقدر نعتمد كلنا سوا على بعضنا، ويكون نحن مجتمعنا متكاتف. مثل سبق وقلت نحن في لجان بيديروا كل مشروع انتاجي بالضيعه او كل مشروع خدماتي مؤلف من شباب وصبايا من بشمزين، وعندنا الخبره وعندنا الكفاءه. شكرا.
شكرا لك. يمكن فينا نتعلم هيدا البايلوت بروجكت فيه انعمل بغير مدن او بغير ضيعه، لانه حدك بعكار ابدا ما عندهم ابدا طاقه ولا طاقه متجدده حاليا يعني. So Soha, we'll go back to you and then I think we can close the panel.
Be very, very brief because I think everything's already been said. In terms of transfer of knowledge, engagement, local participation, I think the two things that might be a bit that maybe have not been raised, and I think I just want to add to the list. One is macroeconomic changes in general, because this is something we've been struggling with in Egypt, where the macroeconomic changes driven by international financial institutions are affecting the energy transition, affecting people, affecting households, and so on. And then the other thing is that ensuring, because a lot of these new projects are going to be externally funded, there is no way we will be able to support this internally. And given that Egypt is struggling with a huge debt problem, climate finance is key here, and it making sure that this transition doesn't overburden a country that is already overridden with debts and debt repayments. I think these are just the two things that I can highlight further.
Thank you, and thank you so much. I mean, please join me in thanking also the wonderful panelists online and in person. We don't have time for question and answer, right, Christina? We have to leave the room. Okay, I think we'll have time during the lunch to engage with our speakers here. And again, thank you so much for your time and for raising the different questions, and not to sound very negative. I really hope that we can find, a peaceful future for our region, where justice is at the forefront, and it is given, with what you had mentioned, Musna, the solar panels being destroyed as we speak. So what type of energy justice are we actually building in this region, and what type of energy transition and energy sovereignty are we really building for the next generation? Thank you so much, and the lunch is outside. Yes, maybe.
Just in conclusion, I just wanted to say a couple of quick words, and thank you, Samin, for the moderation. First, to actually thank Christina, who's actually unfortunately will also be leaving the project. So this is our last. So just wanted to thank you publicly, Christina, for all your support and trust. Also, just while we conclude this conversation, obviously we had this conversation on so many levels today, and I think it was intentional. Right? I mean, we all know and we all recognize that energy is political, but often this conversation tends to have at the level of geopolitics, very macro level. It's about who has oil, who has this. The new technology, the renewables, they are also political, but they're posing questions about what is the level, how we think about it. What does the technology allow us as a society to organize? Is it going to be at a communal level, or is it going to be at an individual level, like Ahmed was saying, where each one of us is sovereign within ourselves? But that raises other questions of equality, because that means some community maybe get better organized than others. So as a country, how do we create these equity? There are obviously no easy solutions, but what we hope to do in this dialogue, what we've been hoping to do with the project, with the dialogues that we're having at national level, at across many actors, is to stimulate this conversation, to actually recognize the stakes that are there, to find ideas, to see if they can be upscaled, and to learn from them. And I think today's conversation really was very helpful. We will continue with these conversations. Our project is not just about energy. The next couple of years, we're going to also be looking at some of the same questions on two other essential elements of a transition in our region, namely water, something that is really core and essential, how we think of it, what are the concepts that we can approach it, what is water justice, what is access to water, what is a transition to a more sustainable model, but also in addition to water, our food. We could talk, is it even food sovereignty, food security, food systems? And as someone now who lives in Europe, I always joke, because when I live in France, and when they talk about food, they always talk about food sovereignty. But when they talk about food in our region, it's about food security. The same officials, and I always wonder why. Why is it food sovereignty in Europe versus food security in our region? And what does food sovereignty mean in our region? So just to invite you that we will continue these conversations. Thank you very much, and please join us for lunch.